Alright, we are live. Welcome to HUMANE Mind Live, episode 109. 2009 might be ending, but trying to undo 2016 never will. So, I do have up on the screen Netflix. I'm going to be talking about a couple of shows and stuff that I caught up on over the Christmas break and the weekend, when I actually gave myself some free time. I was like, oh, hey, this is something good to catch up on, because it's been dead for like the entire week as far as news. Nothing is really going on since the last major thing, I guess, was the PBS Democratic debate. A whole lot of nonsense, impeachment.
There's one thing that I forgot about that PBS debate. The announcer lady, or one of the people asking the questions, was talking to what is the guy's name? She said Yang.
Steyer, but she said Yang.
Yeah. She was looking at Steyer and called him Yang like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, he said Mr. Yang, and then the guy Yang goes like, "I'm over here."
I mean, I know SNL did a skit, but I was watching the real thing and I couldn't get through it. I was like, this is so much worse. This is worse cringe. I mean,
yeah, there was more laugh out loud moments in the PBS thing than there were in the SNL thing for me. I was just like, wait, did that really happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then they got on the whole topic of people of color, and at that point, it's kind of like, man, you're the one who voted on this.
Oh, yeah, I guess we didn't talk about that. Did we talk about that previously, when it's like Democrats are talking about, man, it's all old white people are our candidates, and it's like, yeah, you're the Democrats. You voted on those people.
Wasn't Republicans.
Yeah, that Republicans have nothing to do with your Democratic debate. And like, oh man, is it because of racism? And it's like, well, if it's because of racism, that's in your own party.
Yeah. I mean, Democrats are the racists, so just cut it out. And I don't think anybody actually considers Asians people of color.
No, I've said it many times. Asians are not people of color. Asians are super whites. They're white plus.
I would say even people from India.
Mm-hmm.
They're considered in an Asian bucket.
Yeah.
And they have, I mean, pretty much every skin color under the sun is included in Indian.
Yeah, I mean,
They got some real fair skin, some real dark skin, but
when it comes to success and when it comes to low crime rates, IQs, and all, yeah, India's up there with the rest of the Asians.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't know. Skin color has nothing to do with it, and Asians,
yeah,
whatever.
So,
nah, they didn't have to say that because I don't know, for some reason that.
Anyway, I have no idea.
Another subject. I saw or tried to force myself to watch more of the debate a couple nights ago. I cannot finish. Just the worst.
Yeah.
Oh, and then they asked Joe Biden if he would run for a second term if elected the first term, and he was like, no.
Well, he didn't say no, but he said, I can't. I'm not gonna say one way or the other, and I gotta get elected first. And it's like, okay, it's not a good
Yeah, well, his first response was no.
Yeah.
And he said, no, it's undecided one way or the other. I'm not even elected yet, so let's just focus on that. I'm like, that's the worst answer. That's.
Oh, okay, yeah, because they asked him if he would run if he would confirm that he would run a second, not just if he would. Yeah.
The very first thing that came out of his mouth, he said no.
Yeah, I was like.
And then he went on to explain that I'm not even elected yet, so let's concentrate on that first. I get where he's coming from, but that's the worst answer. You're just supposed to say, yeah.
Yeah.
What other answer?
Yeah.
Why would they want to you the first time if they don't think you're going to stick around?
Mm-hmm. The other thing that was pointed out is that makes him that would make him a lame duck president, because it means he doesn't have to do anything. Like, usually when you're, doing 2 terms, you're doing things in your first term that you wouldn't do your second term. You're doing, like, okay, I've gotta do whatever I can to make sure that I get reelected for the second term. Well, if you're like, well, there's no chance of reelection, it's like, well, then what exactly are you going to do in your one term? Usually that means you're not going to get a whole lot done because if you look at presidential history, the first 4 years, it's very rare to get most things done. Like, you can make all these campaign promises, and then you get stonewalled and nothing gets through. And it's the second term where a lot of these presidents are getting most of what they wanted on their first term accomplished.
I mean, that's when Obamacare went through, was the second term.
Yeah, it's setting up everything and then completing it in the second term.
Correct. But if you're saying probably not, either you didn't do your job well enough the first term to get reelected, or you don't plan on sticking around. So even if people like what you did, you're like, nah, I just wanted to do the 4 years and I'm out.
Yeah, it's very rare for somebody to get a whole lot done in 4 years. I mean, if you look at, it's impressive what Trump was able to do in his 3 years. If you look at compared to Bush or compared to Obama,
that guy's like a workaholic or something. I mean, he's done quite a bit, and a lot of what his platform was.
Yeah, and despite heavy resistance, which is even more telling. So if things go like I hope and predict, that 2020 ends up being kind of a landslide for conservatives and Republicans, then he's going to have a hopefully unobstructed second term, at least for 2 years, in which case then we're likely to see more progress on the wall. Here's the other thing that I don't think we covered it, or I covered it, or, I mean, it's been kind of pushed under the rug. A lot of people were talking about, oh yeah, he's building a wall, but none of it is new. And it's like, that changed, I think, in November, where they're actually constructing new sections of wall that had never existed before, and that got ignored. Like, it's like, hey, we got our first stretch. I mean, it's only a couple of miles here and there, but it's new wall. Like, most of the other wall that was being built was replacing old wall with the new design. So they're like, okay, it's not everything we expected. It's not blocking out everything, but it's wall that wasn't there in the first place. Oh, and I didn't talk about that either. There was a video that was going around on social media showing two guys climbing the current wall, where they basically just got a hook ladder, threw it over the top. One of the guys held the end, and the other guy climbed up, and once he got to the top, slid down the other side. And that was going on. It was like, oh, it's so easy to climb over this wall and all that sort of stuff. But it's not just the wall itself. They've also got Border Patrol, and they've got cameras and stuff. So they knew that guy had crossed, and that guy was apprehended. So he didn't make it very far. Yeah, sure, he was able to scale the wall and slide down the other side and then start running into the desert, and Border Patrol caught him because they knew exactly where he would be. It's kind of like, yeah.
That's what the sensors and the cameras are for.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're still going to have to monitor everything, but it's a lot easier when there's something out there to monitor with.
Yeah. So there's two factors that people are ignoring. Is that big wall, yes, you might be able to scale it as one person and then run across. You can't put a vehicle over that wall, or you'd have to tear down an entire section of the wall to get a vehicle through. That means you can only get so far on foot, whereas Border Patrol is patrolling that with vehicles. So that's a huge hindrance for people. Whereas, like, these open sections of border, there's people crossing on foot. Yeah, there's doing that all the time. But what people usually do is they get in a truck. They load up a truck, cross the border, go a couple miles across the border, and then kick people out and then go back. Because that's a lot. Because by the time Border Patrol can scramble and get to where they think the vehicle is or whatever, it's, the vehicle's already across the border and out of their jurisdiction. And then they've got a bunch of people scattered around that they're trying to catch. It's like, you can't do that sort of thing with this border wall. And so what Border Patrol is saying is like, yeah, this is the deterrent we needed. It helps us catch people. We see exactly where they are, where they crossed, as opposed to just being like, well, we found people coming in, and we're trying to trace it back to where they entered. Because that's what they're kind of doing right now without the wall. Is they see, like, oh, we just got two people. How did they get this far in? And then they kind of just like, well, where did these guys come from? And they got to pinpoint and kind of work their way back to where the initial entry point was. And
yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's a hindrance. It's supposed to slow down and, I guess, decrease the viability of mass immigration or groups of people, or like you said, vehicles coming over.
Yeah.
Now, if they want to do it, sure, they can try a hook ladder, and they're going to have to scale one at a time, or have a bunch of hook ladders. At which point, we have sensors on these new walls. We have cameras placed every so often, which they can check and say, well, we've got a small family and a ladder. Let's go check it out.
Yeah. So it's not supposed to be impregnable or the walls of Troy or something like that. It's something you can't easily hop over like a chain link fence, and it did something you have to plan to go over.
Well, it's the same concept of having even just a chain link fence or a wooden fence around your yard.
Yeah.
It deters people from skipping through your backyard. Without it, could be people just randomly walking through, taking stuff, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Not quite sure, is it safe to leave my kids out in the back for 30 seconds while I go grab something and run out because I have no fence? But with the fence, it deters people. They'll walk around. They'll go some other way.
Yeah, and the higher the fence, some of these fences that are kind of like a little over waist high, yeah, people hop through backyards. There's tons of videos of people doing this, and it's, kind of one of those chase scenes in movies where guys are hopping over this fence and hopping over that fence, and and jumping up on a dumpster and then on top of roofs. But if you're talking about like a 12-foot, if it's a 12-foot fence, and then the border wall fence is 30 foot high, 30 feet high. So,
a wooden privacy fence that's 8 foot tall. Nobody's climbing those.
Yeah. So, what I would like to eventually see is a double wall. We got to get one layer of wall first, and then there would be a second.
A DMZ or a buffer zone.
Yeah. So it's like, well, you made it across the first one. Well, now you have to make it over the second one. So, and while you're in between, you're kind of just a sitting duck like that. Because Border Patrol could. It's got to. So something that would be wide enough for vehicles to go through, but not that. Not narrow enough where they could just put a bridge across both of them. But something like that. It's like, okay, you scaled one wall. Now you got to go and scale another wall. I think that, and then as long as there's vehicles that can go through, it's like, yeah, while you climb, the sensors went off when you climbed the first one. Now you gotta scale the second one and then get away. But granted, that's one wall. One wall is what we need right now, but 2 walls would be kind of like an optimal setup. And the second wall, I would think, would either be higher or be harder to scale, things like that, because it just acts as that extra.
Yeah, it's more of just a deterrent. You can't prevent everybody. There are going to be people. Could be a team, with a blowtorch trying to cut through whatever.
And they've shown sections or videos of that as well. People cutting through sections of the wall and then slipping through. Cutting a section of the wall big enough for one person to fit through and then fitting someone through. But again, that sets off all the sensors. They know exactly what's going on.
It takes a while to do that.
Yeah. So by the time, and granted, people are getting through the wall on foot with Border Patrol knowing exactly where they cross the wall. That's the huge advantage this wall serves. It's not just the, hey, it's a physical barrier that you gotta cross over. It's we know exactly where you entered and you're on foot. We are on vehicles. They've got Jeeps and Humvees and I don't think they use what are those called, 4-wheelers or anything like that. But I would assume because of the terrain they would want a vehicle like that. And it's like, oh yeah, you're not gonna outrun us. We saw you entered at this point. You've only been on, and we know when you entered. This is our search radius for you. We're going to find you.
Yep, I think that would work if we had a double.
Yeah, I think the double one, it might be a little overkill, but I think that would be like, yeah, we don't even have to.
The only one cross would be like Steve McQueen.
Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, you may have crossed the first one, now you got to find some way to cross the second one, and by the time you get to somewhere along the second one, Border Patrol should be like should be able to see you visibly. It's like, yeah, that's where that would be ideal, because that leaves, you know, they don't have to chase you down or anything. They just have to wait on the other side of the wall. I'm like, you done yet?
Yeah. You have fun over there?
Well, you made it to the top of the second one. All right, come on
Recess is
down.
over. Time for some actual schooling.
Yeah, because that is, so the purpose of the second wall is, yeah, by the time they get to the top of the second one, Border Patrol should be there and have eyes on them, as opposed to being like, okay, we know they crossed at this point in time, and we know that they've been on foot for however many minutes, or, you know, whatever. I don't know the exact response time for that, but it's to narrow the search for the individual.
Yeah. And also just make it difficult for mass immigration.
Yeah, and
Oh.
so, yeah.
Very good thing, and we're not the only country to do that. There's other countries that are doing it, and it shows that it works.
And so the reason I brought that up is, with that, I think he's fulfilled every campaign promise that he made.
Oh yeah, and some of it you would have never thought. The whole NATO thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He passed that in his 3 years. Passed that in his first term. He's got new sections of the wall. Granted, it's not the full wall, but
it started.
Yeah, it's started. All it needs is, so for new sections beyond it. Well, the sections that are being built are new wall where there was never wall before, but it was stuff that was approved in previous administrations. It was just never done. That's the stupid part of this, is that it was approved by Congress years ago, and then nothing. No funding for it.
Yeah.
No construction on it. So, like, yeah.
Obama and Hillary Clinton talking about adding extra barrier protection, adding more fencing, things like that. And they never really put anything into the budget for it. So the budget for Border Patrol just barely kept any of the, you know, the detention places, whatever they're called.
Yeah, the detention centers open. Yeah.
So barely enough to even keep those afloat. So Trump says, yeah, we're finally going to put into action what you guys have been saying for the last 10 years. Now they're completely against it. And then he goes to allocate military funds to that, because that is national defense.
Yep.
And he's, as the executive, the president, he has every right to do so.
Yep. And it was being held up in the courts, and then the courts were like, no, we can't stop it. So
no, that's his job. He's doing his job. You guys are just, they're trying to stop the president from doing the president's job. That's the.
So now that now the courts are like, yeah, we can't do anything to stop this. He's allowed to do this. This is within his executive power. He hasn't broken any laws. Now that that's being done, now that new walls are being constructed, he's gonna have a full year of that. So within 3 years, I can't think of a campaign promise that he made that he has not fulfilled yet. So he's got 1 year to just keep building on it. Now, there's one thing that might torpedo 2020, but I think that it's hard to, so a financial collapse. There's one in the future that is inevitable. It is inescapable. Like, it's unfortunate, is because of the situation we were in 2000 and, was it 16? No, 2006. Right? No, when was the financial collapse?
We've been on the rise since 2008, that economic decline, but we never fully recovered.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a symptom of not necessarily hyperinflation, but of inflation and bad lending practices and credit kind of.
Yeah. And so
what was estimated.
So currently the U.S. is still doing, they're still doing subprime. They're doing subprime worse than before. So what subprime was it wasn't the only factor. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to that, and it exacerbated a problem that would have been much more manageable. This
is the really frustrating part, right? the whole reason I got off credit cards is
Mm-hmm.
because past experiences taught me if you can't afford it, you don't need it. Save up, and yes, I understand housing can be expensive. That is one of those things you're very likely going to need to get a loan. But if they're not doing the subprime mortgage garbage, they're looking out for those who actually will pay the loan back and properly estimating who should receive a loan, and we stick to that. That means, yes, potentially less loans going out, but it also means more availability of funds and the more likelihood that banks are putting out reliable loans. But since it's a little more difficult to get a loan unless you have your credit up, housing prices will have to drop because you're not going to have as many people on the market buying houses. So the government subsidizing with these subprime lending practices has actually driven housing prices up artificially.
Yeah.
That was housing bubble crisis.
And we're seeing the same concept or the same principle in effect in college tuition. So
yeah, if you can't afford to go to college, don't go.
Yeah.
Save up your money and go later.
So right now we've got multiple. So in 2006, which was the start of that, and it 2008 is when it so. I guess it's kind of like an explosion. Like the initial shock hit in 2006, and then the what's that called? The
aftershock.
Yeah,
I think that's what it is.
Well, there's an initial wave, like the sound wave or whatever, and then there's the actual explosion, right? So I don't think that's the aftershock, because the aftershock is the that's after the explosion. That's kind of like the residual effect, right?
Yeah.
Or do I have that backwards? Yeah, because
I would say it's small tremors. Before.
Yeah, it's like so it hit it 2000 like 2006 is like some people were starting to feel the hurt, but then in 2008 is when it's like okay, now that they've got the full devastation, like that's
a couple 100,000 people laid off.
Yeah, so but all the things that we were doing prior to 2006, they're in effect right now. And one of the ways that the U.S. recovered from 2006 and 2008 was quantitative easing and low interest rates. And those low interest rates, print more money and keep interest rates low. Now, prior to 2006, the interest rate was at a moderate rate. It wasn't. I don't think it was anything it wasn't like 10% or something like that. I think it was 4 or 5%. I don't know the exact number, but they had wiggle room.
I thought it was about 5%.
Yeah, it was 4 or 5%, and they reduced that to less than 1%, and it's been at less than 1% for like a decade. It's been very close to zero. So since that was one of the tools they used to sort of recover from that initial crash in 2008, they no longer have that tool. So if there's another crash, they they went from 5 to less than 1. Well, now they've got less than 1 going to negative. There's not the same buffer. I think they've talked about. I think actually right now it's slightly above 1, but not by much. Because they talked about. Because every time they talk about raising it a whole lot or raising it back up to 5, the market, it shudders or whatever, and then prices drop and all that. So they're like, oh no, don't talk about increasing that interest rate anymore. It's kind of that's the taboo topic.
Stuck with it.
Yeah, they're stuck with it being less than 1% or right around 1%, which doesn't give them a whole lot of buffer.
No.
And like
they're not recouping what's being lent out, and the more they lend out, if depending on how many people are actually defaulting on whatever is being lent out, they may be breaking even or getting nothing, which means all we have going into the economy is printed money, this quantitative easing, which doesn't help to add more money to lend, because if that money's not coming back, you have just hyperinflated the currency. You have done nothing other than that.
To the tune of several billion a month.
Yes.
So there's that going on. The other thing, so like you were saying, is the money coming back in. Well, we've already seen. So while employment is up, the job market is growing. Like GDP is going up. The number of people defaulting on loans, home loans, car loans, school loans, those numbers are increasing. Like in 2006, car loans weren't a factor. Student loans weren't as much of a factor. I mean, they existed, but these were like, yeah, they were not outside of the norm. Now we're seeing home loans defaulting at a rate similar to 2005, 2006, and we're also seeing car loans and student loans on top of that at higher rates than they'd usually be. So all of these are kind of like, uh-oh, those are starting to increase. That's not a good sign, because that means the GDP can grow all at once, people can have jobs and stuff, but if these loans are defaulting, that's going to have this, what's that, like a domino effect on the rest of everything.
Well, so I got a question for you.
So that might derail 2020.
So since we're on the subject, I'm not sure what else you wanted to possibly bring up within the news, but I don't know if you wanted to take a minute to discuss currencies, basically currencies with lending practices. Eventually, inflation will get too high and that currency will collapse. It's pretty much unavoidable. There's not really a way to have lending practices without it kind of eventually so much is lent out that can no longer be paid back. The currency has lost its value.
You're just talking about inflation in general? Because that's...
Inflation in general, at some point, it gets to be too high where the currency can no longer back the inflation, and so you have an economic decline.
Yes, because... So what happens is... So what you're talking about is... Inflation is always bad, because inflation means you're losing value.
Correct.
Like, so supposedly, U.S. inflation is somewhere around 4 or 5%. That's not accurate. That's what the government's, what they're basing that on is something called the Consumer Price Index, which they take the price of goods like, common household items. I think bread is included in there, eggs, common food items that people purchase on a regular basis. What's not included in there is gas. What's not included in there is the price of milk, which, granted, milk hasn't been going up all that much, but it is one of those things is the price of gasoline fluctuates a lot, and when it goes up, that is a significant portion of your budget. Same thing with milk is a commodity people purchase pretty regularly, and if that price of that goes up by $1, well, now you're spending granted, it's not going to break your bank, but that's less money you spend elsewhere. So that lowers the amount of things you can buy with the same amount of money. That's
yes and no, but especially in the food industry, if you jump back even 50 years, production amounts and availability of food have skyrocketed.
Yes.
Which would mean massive supply, still same demand, so pricing should
decrease.
Even with inflation, stay about even, or should have gone down some.
Yeah. The natural progression is for prices to drop the more supply of that good or commodity is available.
Or the easier it is to come about, the better what am I thinking? Like a line production methods, technological advancements, they just make things cheaper.
Because, if you think about it, back in the 50s and 60s, the price of milk was like 20 cents a gallon or something like that. That was before we had refrigerated trucks. That was when people would go door to door with a hunk of ice, chisel out a block, and then you'd pay for an ice block. Now we have refrigerators in your house. All of that stuff has been streamlined. It's way cheaper to ship things and keep them stored cold and make them more convenient, and there's not one general store that you got to drive or 2 miles to get to. it's down the corner. There's, there's a Walgreens and Starbucks on every corner block in most cities. It's like, yeah, it's within walking distance to get to grocery stores, and you have more in one grocery store or one, Walgreens, CVS, whatever, more in that general store than most people had access to even in the 50s. So there's more abundance, and yet prices are like 100 times what they were in the 50s. That's like, instead of 20 cents, well, I guess maybe it's 10 times, right? Not 100 times. If it was about 20 cents-ish for a gallon of milk, well, gallons of milk are about $2.30, or, depending on what time you buy.
Yeah, somewhere in the range.
Somewhere in that range. So it's like 10 times higher. It's like, wait a minute. But it's cheaper. It's the milk manufacturers are able to produce. Yeah.
Price increase.
Oh, 20 cents. Yeah. What am I thinking? Dollars. Yeah. Right? No, wait.
Yeah.
1,000%. Yeah. 1,000%, 10 times. Yeah.
Yeah.
1,000% increase. And yet it's cheaper, like, as a percentage of so, like, companies that produce milk and put milk on the shelf, it's cheaper and easier for them to create that product now than it was back then. And yet the
Correct.
price is higher. The price is a higher percentage of people's net income.
Yeah, so I would say
it's a different rate. Yeah,
is using consumer products for this price increase and saying, well, inflation's only going up such and such is completely wrong.
Yes, because so what they do, they only take specific items, but they are ignoring key items that are better indicators of actual inflation. Items that are better indicators of actual inflation would be milk, which is for some reason excluded. I don't know if bread is excluded, but I know milk is excluded from the Consumer Price Index. Gasoline is excluded from the Consumer Price Index. Gasoline is another commodity that has a much better track record. When gas prices go up, you can see that's when, because that was one of the other things at 2006, right? The cost of eggs and bread didn't go up, astronomically. The price of gas went up, because I remember gas was under $1, and then that economic recession hit, and then gas went up to over $3, and in some places it was up over $4 and stuff like that.
Oh, in California, it was even higher.
Yeah, and then it dropped down, and now gas prices are about $2, and I'm like, that's still double what it used to be.
Yeah.
And around, yeah.
A couple days ago, and the basic unleaded, I think, was finally under $2. It's like $1.97. I was like, man, I don't remember ever seeing it this low. When was the last time I seen it?
Oh, yeah,
under $2.
Like 2003, 2004.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So it went from under $1 or around $1 to over $2, and over $2 became the default. And it's like,
yeah,
that's still a huge increase, and yet the price of bread and the price of eggs hasn't increased like that. I mean, they were about $2, and they're still, like, now they're about like $2.50 or something like that for a dozen eggs. Something.
Gas doubled in price. Well,
yeah,
basically quadrupled in price, and then went down to just doubled in price.
Yeah.
But because it went so high, and then went down slightly halfway, everyone's like, "Well, this is great, back to normal."
And so when it comes to some of these things people buy on a regular basis, yeah, they may buy a certain amount, kind of an estimated amount or an average amount per month, but when the price of something goes up outside of somebody's budget, usually they'll switch to something else. They're like, okay, milk's too expensive right now, or eggs are too expensive. Well, I mean, granted, these are low cost items, so that's not likely to be what breaks the budget. But if that goes outside of their budget, they'll go get something else instead. It's like, oh, well, I usually get, the Wonder Bread. I'll buy the store bread because it's cheaper. But it's something along those lines. But when it comes to gas, it's like, well, gas at Shell is $4, and then gas at at BP or whatever, up that's $4.50. Okay, looks like I'm still, you're limited on your number of substitutions, because you can't pour cooking oil in your engine, but you could be like, oh, well, Crisco's too expensive, let's use vegetable oil or peanut oil. You have more alternatives when it comes to food items. You don't have very many alternatives when it comes to gasoline. So you're limited to like, well, that gas station across the street has it for 2 cents less. I'm gonna go there.
I guess I'll have to look more into that, because even when it comes to certain food items, like especially a lot of produce, corn, green beans, all the canned stuff, the vast majority of that comes from the same place.
Oh yeah.
They just slap a different label, and it's branding that increases the cost.
Yes.
So the store brand comes from the same farm as, Campbell's soup with whatever.
So there's another factor to that. Like usually with the name brand labels, they get first dibs. So, like if they're getting from the same supplier, and you're Campbell's or you're Green Giant or something like that, you're gonna get first. Like they the premium stuff.
Yeah, you'll get the best of the crop, and then everyone.
And everybody else gets kind of like, whatever they didn't take, and it might be just as good, or it might be the stuff that's kind of So, but the difference in quality and and all that sort of stuff is mostly going to be negligible. Like
I would say for canned goods, probably very negligible. Go get some fresh produce if you can.
Yeah,
help local farmers.
Yeah, when you're talking about something like that, it's
okay.
So it's slightly bruised or something when you buy the store brand and the regular stuff.
So that's what the U.S. government is currently claiming inflation rates are.
I am of the impression what seems to be more accurate is we're currently somewhere around 8% to possibly 10% of inflation on an annual basis. They're saying it's 3 to 4. I'm saying 8 to 10.
That still seems really high. Like it shouldn't even be 1 to 2% annual.
Yeah. So if here's the other factor that goes into this is by default we should be seeing not inflation but deflation. That's the natural trend throughout history is for deflation.
That's what you would think. If the economy is stronger and the dollar is worth more, you should have natural deflation.
Yes.
Why would it go up when it is more valuable?
Yeah. So, because the way you can increase value is you can either do more with less, or you can create more with the same. There's no other way that I know of. You can either get the same results by using less inputs, or get more more output from the same amount of input. Those are the only two ways of building wealth or of generating value. Like I guess of what's the
not creating new value, but getting more value out of what exists. Because you can start a whole new commodity, a whole new part of commerce.
Yeah. The whole new commodity, but the reason that becomes a new commodity is because you're providing more than what currently was. Right? You start like.
Oh yeah, I guess so. Even if what currently was 0, it falls under the model still.
Yeah, so that's where value comes from. Is either doing the same with less, like reducing the amount of ingredients and still getting the same end product, which is what we see a lot of times when it comes to computers. They used to have these really expensive big parts, and they're like, well, we can replace these huge chipsets with silicon. Silicon is much cheaper. We replace that. It does the same job. It's smaller. It's cheaper. Boom. We now have a cheaper overall product. We're getting the same end result of this computer that does what you want, but we've got less inputs because now we don't have to have these expensive gold circuits. We just cheapo silicon in there. So that's doing the same with less. The other thing that they've done is like, well, now that they've got these silicon capacitors and other things, like they basically replaced all that with silicon. Now it's like, well, because things are so much cheaper, now instead of being limited to a couple megabytes, we can increase that to gigabytes. Now your standard desktop has gigabytes, and the first supercomputer had a couple kilobytes. So sad to think about. Like, ooh, we've got a couple thousand bytes, and it's like your cell phone has several gigabytes on it. that is the same size, but now you've got more memory, you've got more space to work with. That's an increase in value. But both of those things usually reduce the cost, because if you can create the same product but there's less inputs, for the creator of that product, it's less expensive. And usually if you're like, well, it's less expensive, I can drop the price of that product and I can increase my revenue.
Yeah, you increase your purchase or your user base.
Yeah, you're lowering the cost of the good, but you're likely to sell more of that good, and you're going to reach this point where it's like, yeah, at the previous price, we were selling, I guess maybe let's try to use, kind of hypothetical numbers. So if you were previously selling 100 of a product, and you were making $20 for every product you sold, right? That means you were making $200. Or, wait, no, $2,000, sorry. 20 times 100.
Yeah.
So you're making $2,000, whatever, within a month. Now, if you find some way to reduce how much it cost, like, so you're like, okay, well, now I can produce that same item, and instead of making $20, I can make $25. Okay, I can keep the same price, and now I can make $250 or $2,500 a month, or I can drop that price by $5, and instead of selling 100 a month, boom, it goes up to like 200 a month. I mean, granted, that's all hypothetical. There's going to be some give and take, but it's like, instead of adding an extra $50 to my, or $500 to my revenue, I changed it from, instead of getting 2,500, if I was able to double the amount of customers I had, I would be making $4,000. So there's some, that's just the law of supply and demand. So there's some golden ratio between that 4,000 and that 2,500 where you would reach this equilibrium where you would get the most profit possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what businesses are seeking. And so they're like, well, if I drop that from, if I said instead of dropping it the full $5 that I just saved myself, if I drop it by $1, well, then I'm selling an extra 20 units or something like that. So there's a whole bunch of factors that go in with that, and so usually they'll like, okay, let's drop it down a little bit. What's my price? Okay, drop it down a little bit more. How many customers did I increase? Because if I'm the amount of profit per item sold times the number of items sold is how you figure out what your overall new profit is going to be. And if you're trying to get the most bang for your buck, or the most profit out of an item, you're going to reach that equilibrium between. So it's like, yeah, I may like, if I save myself $5 per item because I created a new process, or products, or the components or the ingredients for that item are cheaper, I may save myself $5 per 100 customers right now, but let's see if I drop it down $1 and I get 50 new customers because I dropped it down $1. Well, that's going to be a much bigger savings than that $5 per existing customer. So there's a whole bunch of I probably made that more confusing than it actually is, but it's a simple supply and demand intersection, and there's that place, the sweet spot where those two lines intersect, where the demand has gone up enough and the supply at the price point reaches that equilibrium, and then you're getting the most possible profit for that particular item.
Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense. That would also explain, if it was natural.
Yeah, so it's
a governing body or some sort of currency that was kind of maintained or floated about.
Yeah.
And the credit lending, if it was just strictly, this is price at whatever money, then that value of that money would increase, which would be a decrease in inflation. So
so
that being said,
so I brought all, I guess I over-explained that to bring up the point is employers, or sorry, not employers, but companies that manufacture a product are looking to lower the cost of their good, not because they get more profit per good. I mean, there would be a benefit, but because that allows them to lower their price and increase the number of customers, because they are going to make more money the more customers they have. It's like there's an incentive to constantly looking for ways to lower your prices and then passing that on to your customers, not only your existing customers, because, hey, maybe your existing customers will buy more of that product at a lower price, but also to generate new customers, people who wouldn't buy it at the previous price, but would buy it at a lower price. So they're constantly striving to lower the cost of a good and service. And we see this exploding when it comes to tech. Because tech is constantly looking for ways, like, how can we do more with less? How can we do with more with less?
See, they'll even do that to the extreme.
Yeah.
If you look at console launches,
like
the PlayStation 2, Sony was taking a loss on every system, but it's because once the system was out there, they would make money on the games and peripherals and the services that went along with it. So it made more sense. Hey, we're not making money, but without that push, we wouldn't have DVDs.
Yeah, because they wanted the customer base. The customer base
Correct.
is always they lowered the price to get the most customers possible. And the whole time they kept redesigning and redesigning. What can we take out of this? What can we move? What can we move around? What can we fix? What can we do to improve? And eventually they got the PS2 Slim, where they were making money on that forever. It's like
already having like a 10 million user base when that came out.
Yeah.
Now DVD was the de facto media.
Yep.
It used to be VHS. Everyone was unsure on DVD until that happened.
Yeah, that was yeah. It's surprising. The other thing is Blu-ray became the standard because of the PS3. And again, Sony decided, we'll take a loss on this system as well. We're pushing our format. They got that format. They are now the de facto standard. Beat out HD DVD, or is that the name of that? Yeah, whatever the one that was.
Microsoft.
Was with Microsoft. Yeah, it wasn't made by Microsoft, but they were the ones using it.
It was the platform they were backing. Yeah.
Yeah, and now everything's Blu-ray. All the new media. Now they've got like Ultra 4K or something like that, but
it's like Ultra 4K Blu-ray or just direct.
But it's still on a Blu-ray, and Sony owns that technology. So them pushing that with the PS3 and be like, we'll take a loss on every PS3 sold because we're making a profit elsewhere. And the entire time, again, they're going into the internal, like, okay, how can we save money here? What can we do here to cut costs? What can we replace? Can we get a different manufacturer for this particular item, replace that, then it's cheaper. They kept doing that, and then again, just like with the PS2, they got to the point where PS3s became profitable. And what did they do? They didn't keep the price the same to keep it no, they now that it's profitable, drop the price, because the more systems sold, the more money they make in the long run.
Yeah.
So
okay, so that being said, that's the way the natural market works.
Yes. Without interference.
Products that manufacturers, producers, or even service providers are going to figure out more efficient ways to trim down costs so they can get more customers or produce more of a product to have more available to meet whatever the demand is. So that makes sense.
Yep.
So if you look at, say, our government's currency, I'm a little fuzzy as to like pre-Fed what kind of inflation rate there was, because we've had a couple of different currencies there, but I know once the Federal Reserve got their grubby paws on us.
So the statistics on that are really like almost non-existent, because most of the statistics we have on inflation were from the government after the Federal Reserve and after really a lot of the information we have is from the IRS. But prior to 1913, there was no federal income tax, so there was no IRS. So a lot of the
market just kind of ran itself.
Yeah, a lot of the numbers that we currently have as far as what the U.S. is doing or how the U.S. is doing economically is because of reporting into the IRS from businesses and individuals.
But I mean, if we look at what was happening during the time frame before,
There was mostly deflation.
We're booming. Businesses were booming. Cities were sprouting up everywhere. Most of our major cities were established during that time frame.
Yeah.
Even like San Francisco, St. Louis, Chicago, all these places were springing up well before then, and it looked like the U.S. was actually doing very well.
Yes.
And just extremely self-sufficient. I don't even think we were doing that much international trade. Some, yes, spices and teas and whatnot. Yeah, obviously there gonna have to be some kind of international trade, but not.
So the majority of the U.S.'s internal success was, like, we've talked about this on previous stream, the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution.
Correct.
So the agricultural revolution, again, producing the same with less, and then it eventually got to the producing more with less, because that's how we got to the point where it used to be 98% agriculture. Like 98% of people in the U.S. were involved in one way or another with the agriculture industry, just feeding ourselves. And today, it's less than 1% of the population is involved in agriculture. And that produces more food than the U.S. could ever consume, so much that we're exporting food to other countries.
Yep.
That is one of the huge... But what that meant is the cost, so not just in dollar amount, but the cost to produce the food and get it to people has been decreasing ever since then. But the price of goods, as we've talked about, is currently going up despite the cost of creating it going down. Now, agriculture hasn't seen the technology booms that we've seen with computers and software, but they have been major advances when it comes to that, as far as, like, you're talking about, there used to be plow horses and crop sharers, right? And then there was basic machinery and then tractors, and now that we have these huge combines and all of these tools where it used to be the work of like 20 different people taking an entire day. Well, now one guy can do in an afternoon.
Now we got massive, like, sterile steel silos for holding grain, and they can sit there for, a couple of years before it gets old.
Yeah.
Fast distribution networks that already pass everything out, so...
Yeah, so the supply is increased, so the cost should be going down, but the cost is either remaining relatively similar or slightly going up. Now, what's going on there, there's three factors that I know of. The first is the U.S. is printing more money. And I don't know if we've talked about this on previous streams, but that is a huge problem. Because if let's imagine, let's imagine 10 people sitting around a table, and there are $100 in play. So every person has $10. Now every person has 1/10 of the overall economy, and yet they can trade dollars around for whatever's in their pockets, or maybe they're playing some kind of game like Monopoly. I don't know what they're, but. Let's say poker, right? I guess.
Correct. I think that's a good example.
Yeah, let's
bill 1% of total value that's available. For every dollar you have in your hand, it's 1%, right? You said there's $100.
But yeah, so okay. Let's say instead of 10 people, that's too many. But let's say 5 people are playing poker, and each of them has $100. So there's $500 total at the table.
I think you're making it more complicated.
No. They're playing, so money's going back and forth, but there's never more than 500. So let's say one guy loses almost everything and is down to his last 10. He's a small chip at the chip stack at the table. Somebody else jumps in with $500 in chips and becomes the new big chip lead. Whatever that guy with his last $10 is, like, yeah, forget it. You, instead of being 10 of 500 is 1/50th of the economy. Well, screw that. He's now 100th of the economy. He just lost half his value just because some new guy showed up.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I just think you're on to an easier example on your first one.
Okay, maybe.
$100 is 1%.
Okay,
if
yeah.
You had it
okay.
$100, now $1 is 0.5% of total.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah. So okay. Maybe it's easier with my original example.
It doesn't matter how many people participate. It's just total value.
Yeah. So there's a certain number of people. There's $100 on the table. $1 is 1%. Now somebody else shows up and drops another $100 on that table. Everybody who only had $1 instead of being 1% of the economy, they're now 0.5%.
Yep.
So whatever they could buy with their original dollar is now cut in half. And that's what we're seeing when billions of dollars are being printed every month. Sure, some are destroyed, but we're not destroying $1 billion a month, just getting lost to wear and tear, or, down a storm drain, or, shredded, or... We're not losing billions of dollars that way a month, but we're printing billions of dollars. And so every new dollar that is added to the economy reduces the value of each current dollar that's in the economy. Because that's what I was going with when I was originally talking about the only ways to increase value is to either reduce the number of components or the expense of creating the same product, or creating more of the product with the same amount of inputs. But adding extra dollars doesn't do either of those. Adding extra dollars doesn't reduce the number of components it requires. It still takes the same number of components to create whatever you're creating. There's just extra money. And it's like, that didn't help me make this thing cheaper or make it better. Now there's just, it's Disgaea. Like, that's, I don't know if you... So the Disgaea, I think, is a good example of this, and I'll go on to explain. So, like, you start off playing the game, and the numbers are like, oh, you only do, like, 10 damage with your sword, and the enemy has 100 health. Okay. So it takes 10 hits to kill an enemy. I mean, these aren't, like, actual numbers for the game. I don't remember the actual numbers for the game. The one thing I do remember about Disgaea is eventually you get to these huge mega bosses with, like, 1 billion HP, and your guy does 10 million damage with his every attack. And I'm like, so it still takes, or I guess I should say 100 million per attack. And it's like, so it takes 10 attacks to kill the guy. And I'm like, bigger numbers, same number of attacks to kill the guy. What did any of that mean? Absolutely nothing.
Nothing changed other than the numbers went up.
The numbers went up, but the ratio remained the same. Or, I mean, granted, there might be a little bit of a ratio, but it's not a significant change in the ratio. I just remember seeing all of these numbers on screen, and I'm like, it still takes... If a fight takes 10 minutes, and original fights when you start off the game when you're really super weak take 10 minutes, and then fights at the end of the game when you're really super strong take 10 minutes. What did you... the numbers went up. The actual strength comparative, non-existent. That's... So deflation is similar to other RPGs where you start off really weak, where you can't quite kill a slime with, it take you a slime monster at the very beginning almost kills your entire party, and then you come back at level 100 and you don't even one-shot the enemy, they just run away and you instantly get XP or something like that. That's what deflation is like. It's like this thing that used to be a problem for you. No, it's so... The cost of it, or the cost of producing it, is so inconsequential, you don't even really think about it. You don't even break a sweat. It used to be a struggle. Inflation is the opposite of that. Inflation is the things that you used to be able to beat easily. For some reason, they got steroids, and you're like, whoa, now this slime monster that I was stomping on is now beating my face in, and I'm coughing up my money just to get him to leave me alone. Like, that would be... Inflation is what the monsters feel in most RPGs. They're like, oh, come on. Where deflation should be the natural state, and I argue that is desirable, right? So a lot of people claim, we don't want inflation, we don't want deflation, we just want a stable economy where the amount of money that is in the system is somewhat similar to the amount of goods or services in the system. No. To me, that doesn't make sense.
Inflation would mean everybody who is vested in the system their money has, the value of what they have vested in the system has gone up.
Yes, that's deflation.
So deflation would make it potentially a little more expensive to get into the system starting out.
Yes.
Because the value is higher, but for everybody who's already participating, is only making them more wealthy.
So yeah, that's the longer you stay in the system, the better off you are. Whereas inflation, the longer you stay in the system, the worse off you are. You have to constantly be doing something to, like, if you stay still in inflation, you are going to fall behind. You have to be constantly generating more and more. Because, like, so, right, they say it's 4%, but let's assume it's 4%. And you start off with $100. And you don't do anything else, you just have that $100. Well, now that $100, now you need, the next year, you would need $104 to purchase the same amount of stuff. And then the next year, you would need another 4 plus whatever 4% of 4 is. But you would need $108 and then some change. And then the next year, you'd need $112 and some change. And the next year, $116 and some change. And it just keeps going up and up every year. And it's like, well, that same $100, okay, so in order to keep up with inflation, I need to find some way to earn, like, if I'm making, like, say I'm earning $100 an hour, but inflation is 4%, well, that means next year I need to earn $104 an hour. And the next year I need to earn $108 an hour in order to maintain where I was. So you have to constantly be earning more than 4% in order to gain any ground.
That's a really good point. We just went through our fiscal reviews at work, and you get annual raises, and the amount that you get is typically tied with performance. But there's kind of this minimum number that everybody gets. So if they gave you a scale of 1 to, I guess, 3 or 3 plus, 3 plus is just outstanding, you're going to get the maximum raise that HR, allocates and says, yeah, this is what you get for giving your job title. And then a 2 is just, hey, did your job well enough? And a 1, you don't really get a raise.
Okay.
But so the average is just slightly above 2, where you do get somewhat of a raise, just kind of your standard raise. And I was discussing that with my boss, and he's like, yeah, it's a raise. It's more of a cost of living adjustment. Yeah. It's no longer a raise. It's
maintaining the status
make
quo.
sure you're actually getting paid thanks to inflation. Yeah. Because if you stay working for us for 10 years and we don't keep this up, you'll no longer, you won't be able to afford your house. You won't be able to afford anything. You'll leave and go look for somewhere else that does keep up with cost of living. Mm-hmm. So this isn't really a raise. This is you making the same. We're just basing it off of inflation.
Yeah. It's a bit like treading water. So
correct.
You haven't gained any ground, you haven't lost any ground, you're just maintaining. But if that cost of living wasn't there, then you'd be losing ground at 4% a month. Now, correct. With deflation, if there was a deflation rate of about 4% a year, that means even if you didn't get a raise for 10 years, you'd still be better off.
You're still making more money, and the only thing you'd have to worry about is maybe going to the next job tier up.
No, you wouldn't technically be making more money. You'd still be so let's say same situation. You're making $100 an hour. Well, 10 years later, you're still making $100 an hour. The difference is,
money. You now have more that you can purchase. You can buy a better home. You can get a better car, better equipment. You can afford more clothes, better food.
Yep. Your quality of life would continually be going up because of deflation.
Correct.
So $100 this year.
What was happening back in right after the Great Depression, but while things were good, like I guess post World War II, when we were still based off of gold.
Oh yeah, that was after World War II and during the 1950s and the early 1960s, the U.S. was seeing deflation.
Yeah,
and massive deflation.
Were abundant. It's that you could afford more with.
Oh yeah.
So your typical steel worker, your mill workers, the guys who were still in the farming industries, the guys who drove around the milk trucks and did whatever, they could all afford nice white picket homes They could afford cars. Cars were like what,
Yeah,
$2,000-$3,000 for a fancy new Thunderbird.
So prior to that, it was rare for a family to even own one car. But during that era, it became common practice for a family to have 2 cars. Same thing with a microwave oven. Microwave oven became a standard household appliance. The radio became a standard household appliance. TV wasn't quite 50s. That came more like in the, I guess maybe that, yeah, I guess that was late 50s for the TV, but that became a standard household appliance. They used to be things that were like, that only the wealthy, the creme de la creme, and yet we started seeing those popping up in middle American households. And some of that is due to the price of those objects dropping, but wages of the average family didn't go up all that much. Or I guess maybe not the average, but the median family household income wasn't going up exponentially, and the prices of those items wasn't dropping that drastically. But since it was experiencing deflation, all of those things put together were like, yeah, this thing that used to be exclusively a luxury item became a standard item.
Yeah.
That was the result of deflation. It's like, yeah, not only is the price of it dropping, but your money is going further, not just on that one particular item, but on everything. So if you used to have to spend $10 at the grocery store, well, deflation, well, now that you don't, hey, today you went to the bill, like you bought your regular grocery order and it was $8. Well, that's $2 that you can spend somewhere else. And so that's what you do. Like, oh, well, I can take that $2 that would normally go to my family's food budget, I'm going to store that away. And so now that, and just all these savings here and there, and it's like, well, now we've got enough savings to go and purchase a luxury item. And it used to be something that was something we couldn't purchase for, like, we'd have to save up for a full year to buy. But thanks to deflation and the price of everything dropping, not just this one particular item, but it's, yeah, my dollar is going further and further every day.
So that also brings up another crazy point. Previous to that point, right, in the 1930s, not everybody had refrigerators.
Yeah.
Most households didn't have a TV. They didn't, like you said, it was very rare for a family to have more than one automobile. In fact, before then, there were plenty of families that had no car.
Yeah, no car.
Washers and dryers were non-existent.
Oh, yeah.
You did it by hand.
Yeah, and you hung your clothes out to dry on the line.
Yeah, that was the standard. That was the norm. After the 50s and 60s, having your own TV, having 2 cars in the garage, having a washer, dryer in your own home, your oven, your refrigerator, mixing or mixers and all kinds of other utensils and things that
vacuums.
Didn't have, vacuum cleaners, just central air conditioning.
Yeah.
This was all booming in that era and became just staples. Nowadays, it's considered those are necessities.
Yeah, if you don't have even poor people, like, hey, you
don't even have a refrigerator? Jeez.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, yeah, wait, I may be broke, I may be living paycheck to paycheck, but I've got a microwave. Okay.
Yeah.
So
listen, what's your AOC was saying that there should be a minimum of at least the government paying for internet. That should be a basic standard of living. It's just internet availability at your home. How is that a necessity?
Well, it's not. But the other thing is the internet has also gone down in price. I mean, that's so
substantially.
Yeah. So here's the thing where we can see with the internet. So the cost of logging on and access to the internet has gone down fairly significantly, and what you get for the current cost seems to keep going up and up, just kind of like it used to be, 20 megabits per second, and then now, and then it was 50, and now I think now it's like 500 is the standard.
I guess it depends where you are. I think here I'm about 200. Yeah, but I mean, I don't use anywhere near that. It's now more than what I could use.
Yeah, I know that's becoming the new standard, because I mean that was like so I was out in Washington and kind of the Richland area, which is kind of it's not exactly a tech hub or anything like that, but yeah, they were offering, it's like, 250 is now the new standard out here. And then I come over here to Connecticut, and they're like, yep, well, I guess maybe it's like 300 is a new standard, and then there are packages for 500 megabits per second, and it's about the same. It's about $80. But the cost of the internet is going down despite inflation. Like, those two are currently at odds. During the 1940s and 1950s...
Because the technology that supports it is just moving so far ahead that it is managing to beat out inflation now.
It's beating out inflation, but during the 50s, so like the late 40s, 50s, and early 60s, inflation or deflation and the cost of goods going down were working in tandem. So we were seeing an exponential. So it's no longer fighting against inflation. Like, both of them were going in the same direction towards lower prices, a higher cost of living, or I guess a better standard of living, not higher cost, better standard of living, more bang for your buck. Both of them were working in unison to make people's lives better, like, rapidly. So now we're in a situation, like, when, fast forward to the 80s through the 2000s, where we've got pretty massive inflation. It's not hyperinflation just yet, but we've got inflation. The cost of goods and services are still going down. Some of those goods and services are not keeping up with inflation, and so their cost is going up. Other goods and services are keeping up with inflation, so their prices are remaining stable. And then other goods, mostly in the technology sector, are dropping rapidly to push past inflation.
Oh, yeah. Computer hardware, solid-state drives have dropped substantially in the last 5 years. The only thing that seems to not be keeping up is graphic card prices, but that's because they are constantly...
That's because demand for them is going up exponentially. But
well, I mean, the technology behind it and what they can do is just incredible. You get the latest graphics card now, so
the technology is improving. The prices are remaining about the same, but the other thing is demand for them is going up. So so there's all those factors are keeping the prices of those relatively high compared to, because, dude, it's so I put my computer together about 10-ish years ago, and I remember paying $1 per it was $1 for every gigabyte, and I thought, I was like, dude, that is crazy for a standard hard drive. And then it was somewhere like $3 for an SSD per gigabyte. And now I'm looking at deals, I'm like, that SSD hard drive is bigger than mine right now. It's twice the size of mine, and they're selling for like $40. I got a 250. I was like, that cost me, I think I even got it on sale, and it was somewhere around $550 for a 250 megabyte or gigabyte standard or SSD. Now we're seeing similar SSDs for $50 and $60, and I'm like, what?
Yep. Well, same thing with RAM. RAM prices used to be, you basically paid $1 per megabit of RAM or megabyte of RAM. Now, for the highest speed RAM, yes, but if you go with like DDR4 or something like that,
I think you mean gigabyte, because not megabyte.
No, it was megabyte.
What? Okay, that seems ridiculous. Like,
the first PCs I was building, this was.
That was late 90s. Yeah, I didn't start looking into any of that
until mid 2000s, where you started seeing systems that went anywhere over 2 gigs. 2 gigs was like, man, that's awesome. Now that's like the minimum to run Windows.
Yeah.
Every system 8 is like the new de facto standard.
All right. So the U.S. right now is experiencing moderate inflation. It's not drastic.
It's not hand yet, but you can tell that it's.
Oh yes.
It is rising. It is making things more expensive, but not because.
So I only mentioned one way. So printing more money is a source of inflation. I said there was 2 more. Another source of inflation is in the banking system itself, and this once I read about this and found out about it infuriates me to no end, and every time I tell anybody about this, they look at me like I'm crazy, and I'm like, wait, what? How do you not? And I'm like, this is like, I've talked with other people about inflation and deflation. They're like, oh no, that's terrible. Like, no, deflation would be terrible for everyone, and that's exactly why we had the Federal Reserve to begin with. It's like, no. What we had the Federal Reserve is there's a practice inside banking called fractional reserve lending. And it sounds harmless or sounds, oh, that's reasonable or practical on the surface. The more you learn about it, the more it's like, once you understand it, you're like, that is the single most fraudulent thing you could ever do. And it's all throughout our banking system. You can't get away from it.
Well, imagine if we could do that with stock prices. Shareholders had fractional shareholding.
Yeah.
Inflate your net worth of your company and say, we've got 50 billion shares. When actually they're only a fraction of a particular share, but you present it as an entire share.
Yeah, instead of 50 billion, you would have 1 billion shares. And so you've got 50 people that all claiming the same share at the same time. Right. And hopefully all 50 of them don't call you on it.
They lend out the same share to 50 people. That's what the banks are doing with that fractional lending. And that's...
Yeah. So with fractional reserve lending, they have to keep 10%. That's actually gone down. I'm going with 10% because that makes everything easier. But I believe it's actually less than that right now, like somewhere around 8% or possibly down to 5%, which means you put 100 in your bank account. They only need to keep 10 of that. And they can lend out 90 of it, and they still show your bank account having $100 in it. They're like, yep, you've got $100.
Transactions. If you make a larger withdrawal, they'll have the money they can take from another account and shift it over till they get whatever lent money back in.
And so the first step of that, you're like, okay, that seems a little odd that they would only keep, there's only $10 in their actual vault, but they say that I have $100. And if I go in and I take my $100 out, well then, yeah, there's $100 in the ATM, and then my account is deducted by $100. That's because they're shifting money around inside their vault or whatever to cover that. Yeah. But they don't actually keep that much money. They only keep... So if a bank says it has $1 billion, what they actually have is $100 million. And then they're showing on paper they have $1 billion. It's like, that seems... Like, and that's why we were seeing... Or when you look back at history, that's why a bank run was possible. Because banks would say, you have $1,000 in your account, and you have $1,000 in your account, and you have $1,000 in your account. There's $3,000 in this bank. And then one person goes in and is like, I'd like to take my $1,000 out. And the bank's like, oh, here you go. Here's your $1,000. And the other two guys are like, I'd like my $1,000 back. And the bank is like, we don't have any money. Like, wait a minute. You said you had $3,000 in your bank. No, I told you guys you each had $1,000 in your account. We only kept $1,000 in the bank. We loaned the other $2,000 out to other businesses.
From my understanding on the bank runs is that the government caused it.
Oh, yeah, a big part of it.
Because the dollar had to be backed by gold.
Yes.
And the government was about to put a restriction that it was now illegal to own gold. So people ran to the banks to exchange their money to get the gold out before the government took it. And all the banks started collapsing, and that was the beginning of the Great Depression.
And part of that was, so yeah, the government said that, yeah, they're gonna, so there was a bank run where everybody's like, oh, I gotta get my money out right now before it becomes worthless because the government's coming for the actual gold. And then it was revealed that the banks don't actually store all your money in the bank. Now, if you're talking about a CD, or what's that, a cash deposit? No, what's CD stand for? I can't remember the term now. It's not cash deposit. It's something. Cash deposit's all that coming to mind.
Certificate of deposit?
Certificate of deposit, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you put your money in a CD, it's not as liquid as, say, your checking account or your savings account. When you put your money in a CD, you're telling the bank, I want you to lend this money out so I can earn interest on it. And that means I'm not going to request that money back for some time. So you put $100 in your CD, the bank's like, we'll give you 6% interest on that. And you're like, okay. So you put $100 in there, and in 1 year you can collect $106. In the meantime, the bank is lending that $100 out, and they're likely making $200. And so they made $94, and you got $6 of that. That's what's supposed to happen. But banks started doing that with their checking accounts and their savings accounts, and are like, well, with the savings account, back in the day, there was no savings account. That's kind of a more of a newer thing. Like, if you look at the history of old banks where they did bank runs, or during the bank, they just had an account. It was like, hey, you've got one account, and then some banks broke it up into an account and then a interest-bearing account. Like, this is your account of just liquid money you can use for whatever, and this is your interest-bearing account. And you don't touch the interest-bearing account, and you use your whatever account. But what these banks started to notice is like, well, this guy's got $500 in his account, but he's only spending $100 a month, and then he deposits $100 a month. And then he spends $100 a month, and he deposits $100 a month. There's $400 sitting in this account that's not going anywhere. He's not using it. I'm going to take that $400, and I'm going to loan it out to another customer, and they're going to pay me back with interest, and this guy won't notice, because we'll tell him he's got $500, and he's only ever spending 100 of it at a time, and he's always replacing that 100. He'll never notice the 400 is missing.
That would be like if you bought a summer home, ask the caretaker, can you maintain the property? And while you're not there, he invites people and charges rent.
Yes.
As if he owns the property. It's not his. He can't do that, but
no,
does it anyways, and you won't know until you show up outside of summer hours.
The difference here is if you catch your caretaker doing that, you can take them to court, and you can sue them, and you can get all of their rent money returned to you for abusing your property, and you can they may even serve jail time. You go to a bank, and you're like, you spent my money, you didn't tell me, and when I went to withdraw my money...
They're all part of that, what is it, the FDIC?
Yep.
Insured?
Yes. So the FDIC...
They are allowed to lend like that.
Yes.
Whether or not you gave them permission, once your money is deposited in their vaults, they can use it as long as they keep that minimum amount.
So here's the crazy thing. So, like, that is terrible. Like, that should be painfully obvious how bad that is. And yes, that means we're seeing an inflation in the banking system, because every $100 in the banking system turns into 9 times that amount in one bank. But when you think about it as these banks interact with each other, you deposit $100 in your account. The bank now takes 90 of that. Well, let's make it a bigger number to make it so 1,000. So the bank only needs to hold on to $100 of that in your account. So like $100 of physical money. They take the $900 that they can legally loan out. They take $900 and they loan out $100 to 9 different people. Those 9 different people now have $100 each. They go to their respective banks, and person number 9 deposits $100, and his bank says, "Oh, I've got $100. I will keep 10 of that, and I will loan out 90." And then bank guy number 8 goes to his bank and deposits $100, and his bank takes $100 and loans out 90. Keeps 10 and loans out 90. And you're like, wait a minute. That $100 or that $1,000 you started with ends up turning to somewhere around $20,000 by the time it gets through. I forget the exact math on it, but you're like, holy crap, are you kidding me? This is happening all the time.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I started off with $1,000 loaned into a bank, and then $900 goes out, and that $900, yeah. So of that,
a check in the bank, and he's like, "Sure, we'll just put that over here. A little interest and invest, and it's gone."
Yeah. So
we've already lent it all out.
You can actually do that the math somewhat easily. So it's 900 was it plus 90%?
Watch aimbot activated.
Yeah. So, and you can keep doing this a little while. So that same $1,000 ends up being $9,000.
Aimbot.
Yeah, so that was how it worked. You deposit $1,000. By the time it goes through the system, it gets it'll get multiplied several times as it changes hands.
Okay.
That
So
same
it's not that
$1,000 in the bank, instead of it just being 100 in there and 900 being lent out, if it goes through multiple banks, yeah.
I forgot here. It's not that it's $9,000. It's 9,000 lent out.
Yes.
And supposed money that doesn't exist.
Yes. $9,000
So
on the books at a bank.
Now the bank has more money. You don't really get anything because it's just a checking account. They keep the extra, but when those loans start defaulting due to heavy inflation,
Hey, next time you
now how are they going to cover $9,000 in loans that was based off of your 1,000? They can't because that's mathematically impossible.
Yes, it's mathematically impossible, but it's the inevitable result of fractional reserve lending.
Well, yeah, that's why we had those bailouts.
Yeah. Because there's more money on the books or on some bank saying, hey, this is how much we owe this person. There's more money on their ledgers than there is physical money in the bank.
Drew, what?
And in the system. You're like... and it's not... Like, it's not the fact of, like, what I was originally saying, like, you do a bank run and you're saying, hey, I deposited $1,000, I should be able to pull out $1,000. They're like, oh, we only kept 10%, here's $100, we owe you $900. But this comes down to it, you deposited $1,000, they are now claiming, through various means, hey, we've got $9,000 of IOUs to people. And you're like, well, somebody can go in and take, there is 1,000 physical dollars being stored somewhere in the system. You take that out, now there's nine...
Nothing.
Yeah, there will be 9,000 extra
IOUs and no actual money.
Yeah, $9,000 of IOUs, nothing to pay it back with. And you're like, so the solution to this would be to outlaw fractional reserve lending. This is what should have happened after bank runs. They're like, oh,
so it would make sense if they started off with CDs where you signed a contract or something stating, hey, this is going to sit, I'm heavily penalized if I withdraw within this first year, which is the way those are normally set up. You got a time where you don't touch it. That allows them to lend it out and guarantee the money's there to lend out.
Yes.
Then when they get the profits back, you get a certain percentage just because you let the bank use your money to make money. And then now they have their own money of which they can lend out on their own. Yeah. That's what they build the bank off of. That's how the bank becomes larger, is by using CDs to build their own pot of money. And then they would get their money insured by an insurance company.
Yeah. And if you look at most credit unions, that is how they operate.
Yes, that's why they stay locally owned, operated. They don't. Yeah. They don't do the fractional reserve stuff. They don't get into the federal banking.
Yeah, they are not members of the FDIC. So the members of the FDIC, what they have all agreed to is because they practice fractional reserve lending, they have more money on their books than they have actually in their bank vaults, and they actually could ever have in their bank vaults. So they've agreed, like, if we don't have enough cash on hand to meet demands, we can go to you and we can request some of your cash and some of your cash and some of your cash, because we're all in this network. We're all in this Ponzi scheme together. It's essentially, it's a Ponzi scheme. That's the crazy thing, is the FDIC is a federally backed and endorsed Ponzi scheme. And it's like, well, if I don't have enough physical cash on hand to meet demands, I can rely on you and you and you and you to help me meet that demand. And it's not just talking about Bank of America to Bank of America, or,
Wells Fargo.
Yeah, Wells Fargo to Wells Fargo. I'm saying Wells Fargo to Bank of America to U.S. Bank to Chase. To all these places are all working together. They've all made an agreement that, hey, if you get if you run out of bills, we'll send you more, because the last thing we need is a bank run and people all fearing that their money's not there. People realizing
your bank starts to do that, they're going to think our bank's going to do that, and then we're going to be in the same problem.
Yeah, the last thing we want is people realizing we're promising them money we can't ever physically actually have.
So this is
so then the what they did to so here's the thing, even with that interconnected system, there is still a potential for bank runs, these agreements were already in place, although not to the same extent, prior to the Great Depression, where a bank in one town would be like, yeah, if you ever need... Yeah, they were already kind of in cahoots with each other. So there was bank runs on, a bank in Illinois, and banks in Missouri would be like, dude, we can't let that happen here. All right, hey, Ferguson and St. Louis and Bridgeton, yeah, if you guys if people like start storming you and arresting, yeah, you can count on us to, we'll try to bail you out and keep us all stable. That didn't work, because everybody started to, like, it wasn't just one isolated town or one isolated bank. It's like all banks were bombarded all at the same time. There was no way, the cat was out of the bag. The game was up. They're like, yeah, we don't have it. None of us actually have it, so
you lent out all your money.
Yeah. So what the FDIC is a kind of a bit like a shell game, right? There's 10 shells on a table, and only one of them actually has the queen. All the rest are duds. And what they can do is they can shuffle that queen around to wherever it's needed. And it keeps everybody's like, oh, yeah, everybody looks at hey, there's 10 shells on the table, there's 10 queens or whatever. And they just keep shuffling it around to wherever it's needed the most. They had similar systems prior to the Great Depression, but when all shells are flipped over all at the same time, you realize, hey, there's only one card under here.
I think the reason they can't do anything about that is because now with as much money is being printed out, we're doing the same thing with other countries.
Yes.
We got no standard and now have no backing. We are lending out, saying these welcome to fractional reserve IOUs. We're going to hand out all this extra money. Hey, we're going to give you, $500 million in U.S. aid and funds. Here you go.
Yeah. And so it's not just the fact that the physical dollars don't exist, because we could always print the physical dollars to match. But again, we've already talked about that as a form of inflation.
Yeah.
But each of those dollars is supposed to represent a good or product or labor or something of value.
Standard of value.
Yes, it's supposed to represent something.
Value, that's what it represents.
You worked for an hour, and in that hour you earned $100 an hour. Well, that $100 represents a full hour of your work. But if it's fractional reserve lending, well, that $100 an hour, well, that means what you worked for an hour is actually only worth about 10. You're like, I thought I was trading my time for $100, but I'm actually trading it for only $10 that I can go and buy something with. That's what it's not literally, but that's similar to what this is because the value of your $100 is reducing so rapidly through this system. Your purchasing power is being constantly sucked away, but it's in a hidden method you don't realize. I forgot where I was kind of going with that because I got kind of sidetracked by an analogy that didn't quite. That probably made it more confusing than it should have been. But
we get the basic, just the fractional reserve.
Yeah. Each dollar is supposed to represent something tangible, something,
Correct.
Like I traded. Okay, that's where I was going with that. I traded my hour for $100, and then I can trade that $100 for your 100 candy bars that are $1 each, and then I have the physical 100 candy bars, and then you take that $100 and you go, get your lawn mowed or something like that for $100. That whatever it represents something done, something physical or something that can be exchanged, and everybody is exchanging it equally. But then when this fractional reserve, and now there's all this influx of fake currency, well, there's still, in that example, there's still only three things going on. There's the lawn mowing service, the candy bars.
Two ideas or two definitions. So the exchange of value is what money does.
Yes.
Money is a physical representation or retention of that value that you can exchange back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Money is typically backed by something that doesn't lose value, like gold and silver,
Yeah.
because those are pretty much have been the de facto standards for all banking systems
Yes.
and all currencies ever.
Because they're relatively rare, they're useful, and they don't degrade.
Correct. So that's what money is supposed to represent. Currencies are a paper or another transactional item to represent money.
Yeah. So instead of actually giving you 100 pounds of gold or whatever, I can just give you a receipt for 100 pounds of gold, because
so
it's easier.
On the old US dollar bills, that's why it says certificate 1 ounce of silver.
Yeah, and that's actually the origin. The origin of currency is actually receipts. Somebody would go to a bank, they deposit however much of a currency or of money. Sorry, they deposit like say 100 gold coins into a bank, and they'd say, "Yep, this is my money. It's in your vault." And then when they would go to purchase things, they're like, well, I've got this receipt that says it's good for 100 gold coins at that bank, and you're selling this horse for 100 gold coins. Instead of me going to the bank, taking the $100 out, or 100 gold coins out, counting them in front of you, and giving you them in exchange for the horse, I'll just give you this receipt. You just walk to the bank yourself, and you can go get that money whenever you want.
Give you the horse, you get whenever you want that gold.
Yeah.
You can go do it.
So that's what they started doing. And then banks were like, well, instead of having the full deposit, why don't I break that 100 up into 10 separate? So now you've got 10 receipts for 10 golds each, and you can divide that up to like, hey, instead of buying 100 gold gold worth of something at a time, well, now you can do it at 10. Or like, okay, let's split it up and do 100. So now you've got one piece of paper or receipt from the bank represents one.
That's fine as long as it's still backed by the original thing that retains the value.
Because there's still the 100 gold pieces in the bank. There's still that physical gold in the bank.
You cannot write a receipt unless you have that gold.
Yes. But what a bank would do, it was, again, it'd keep like 10 gold coins in that bank, and then it'd issue, like, here's your 100 gold, or 100 receipts. And they're like, but there's only 10 golds in your actual vault. Well, if 10 people come together at the same time, how do they get that? How do they get the full 100?
Well, it would make fractional reserve lending makes more sense when there's just currency floating about.
Yes.
When you have something that is backed by, so if I deposit 100 ounces of gold and I have 100 bills, receipts stating those 100 ounces are mine, that physical gold is mine.
Yes.
So it makes it a bit harder to go give that gold off to somebody else, because now there's a physical transfer, not just a paper currency or receipt. It's that gold is mine. You can't just give that gold out.
Yeah.
Even if for lending purposes, you have to ask me if you can touch my gold. It's kind of a property thing. Whereas now, if it's just a paper trail, I deposited some paper into your bank, and you can lend out more paper, and I get some other paper because it's no longer backed by anything. Then fractional reserve lending, it's harder to trace. It makes more sense why people can get away with it, and it's something people don't consider.
Yeah, and
because they look at just the receipt for $1, but $1 of what?
Yeah, and it is an out-and-out fraud. It is the blatant definition of fraud.
Yes.
But, so in addition, so the FDIC, not only do they lend to each other, but this is the thing, so their solution to resolve fractional reserve lending leading to bank runs and giving up the gist that we are lying to you about how much money we actually keep, what they did is they instituted the Federal Reserve. And the FDIC members, if they can't get money from each other, they can go to the Federal Reserve as a lender of last resort. Now, FDIC members, when they're getting cash from each other, they don't owe any interest. So if Bank of America is short $1 million and they're like, hey, Chase, give us $1 million because we're short, Chase will like, okay, we'll give you $1 million, pay it back whenever we need it. There's no $1 million plus interest. Money lent from the Federal Reserve is lent to banks with interest. This is where the interest rate comes in. Right now, we've talked about the interest rate being around 1%. Now, the Federal Reserve is supposed to be the lender of last resort, but from what I understand, that's not so much the case because the Federal Reserve is printing billions of dollars a month and shipping that out to all of the banks that are part of the FDIC, which means they're charging that interest rate to these banks.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah. So the Federal Reserve at the end of the day is a fractional reserve lender itself, similar to all of the banks. So they added a massive fractional reserve lender. The Federal Reserve has no mandate to store any. As far as I know, if they're lending out $100 trillion, they don't even have to have $1 or $1.
They never had it to begin with.
Yeah, they can have zero in their vaults and lend out all this money and expect all this money back with interest. And it's like, that's worse. That is worse than what led to the Great Depression. It's like man can find by 1,000, and that's your solution to resolving bank runs. Oh, so bad. Because, I mean, there used to be the mandate, which is why we had gold in Fort Knox, is that federal notes were exchangeable for a certain amount of gold, like a certain number of ounces of gold. And that was abolished, and then they confiscated gold and all that sort of thing, which should have led to a bank run similar to what led to the Great Depression. But because they had fractional reserve lending, the FDIC, and a Federal Reserve, there was paper currency in the banks to meet demand, and so there was no bank run.
Yeah.
And that is their solution, and so what this does is this magnifies inflation way more than the 4 or 10% that we see in inflation as far as price inflation and the result of printing money from the from the Federal Reserve. This banking system and using the Federal Reserve as the lender of last resort, as the ultimate fractional reserve lender, that is inflation exponentially more than the inflation of the Federal Reserve printing money, because banks can count on that, or these two things work in tandem, but because banks have all of these numbers on their ledgers with no physical something to back it up, the Federal Reserve would be printing money regardless, but they're printing money at an exponential rate to meet the numbers being generated. Well, it's not even on paper anymore. It's all digital. Like, they just any $9,000 deposited in a bank, add a zero on that, and that's digital. Like, for some reason, we just multiplied it by 10 just because we can in our bank. So what this does is regular inflation would be, yes, just printing money, but we're seeing an exponential increase in the amount of money required in the system because of the fractional reserve lending and their solution that exacerbated the problem. I should say solution with quotes around it. It is infuriating to know how we got screwed over on this. And this all happened 1913, way before our parents were even born. Actually, I think our grandparents were born in 1913, right?
And that was the same time Social Security became a thing.
Yeah. So that was systems in place, and even if the Federal Reserve wasn't able to print money at will to do regular inflation, this fractional reserve lending network, it's forget 4%. It makes 4% look like a joke, because you're talking about like 100% inflation that could happen in a single year.
Yeah. But it seems to me what leads to this, and I kind of brought that up earlier in the conversation. If you can't afford it, you don't need it.
Yeah.
Or you can't have it, and that's it. Right? So I understand the need to put your money in a safe spot. I get the idea of why a bank could exist.
Yes.
Because you don't want to keep all your life savings under your mattress if there's no such thing as banks and everyone's just keeping whatever current money is being exchanged, you could break into anybody's house and find money.
Yep.
So to have a secure facility and then maybe pay a nominal fee
Yes.
to store it and protect it, if everybody's paying this tiny fee and it's put into one spot and they can get security. And I understand early banks tried that. That was a lot of the Wild West bank robbery because they were the small towns consolidating their money. So, yeah, there were bandits. Yeah, there had to be extra protection. If there's a way to get around that, there's no need for any of the other Federal Reserve. There's no need for the fractional lending.
Yeah. And
the banks could take that nominal fee, pay out what they need to, or charge just enough to make a little extra that they can invest in. And then they use their own money, that tiny fraction of a percent, or 1% that they get that after they've paid their security, after they paid whoever's watching over the banks, then the tellers and stuff, and then lend that out. And if they lose that on bad lending, then that's up to the bank. It's not. Everyone else has already agreed. You take 2% of my money, I deposited to protect my money. Something like that makes sense.
And if you most credit unions operate on those standards, and credit unions aren't being robbed constantly or anything like that. And if they do have insurance and things along those lines. They've got measures in place. So this is not the Wild West.
But what led to major bank institutions, fractional reserve lending, a Federal Reserve, and things like Social Security are promises from government officials, president-elects, to the people saying, we'll give you more.
Yeah.
We'll give you stuff. We'll give you a way to have retirement so you don't even have to think about it. The government will just give it. Yeah, you'll have to take a little bit out of pay. We're going to now institute an income tax, which is illegal. But along with that, we're going to take more money besides just the income tax to pay for Social Security. And it's just to make sure when you get older, you got, retirement. And people got lazy and said, hey, yeah, let's, that's the same thing as the credit. They got into a system of credit of IOUs saying, this is what's promised, vote for us. And everyone got used to a system of lending and credit instead of earning until you could afford to buy something.
Yeah, so that goes into the third form of inflation, which is government promises. Whether that be the government taking out a loan because, hey, we're over budget, and yet we keep spending because we made a promise to keep spending, so now we're going to borrow from a foreign country, and we'll say, here's an IOU to another country. Well, that is a form of inflation because that's money we're going to have to pay back. It's more money than we currently have, and there's the hope that we'll increase the economy or the GDP to match that, so that way those dollars won't be as worthless. But when you've got these three things working in tandem, inflation gets to the point where it's like, eventually our promises to repay other countries are going to be worthless. So not only is it that promises to other country, but we also have the government's promises to the citizens. Like you was talking about, Social Security is one of the largest unfunded liabilities, and so the national debt is something like 20 trillion. That's another promise that is not backed by any actual money that we owe and we just got to come up with eventually. Social Security by itself is something in the range of like 80 trillion. And then welfare benefits are another 20-ish trillion. So all in all, the government has a IOU, not to other countries, but to the citizens of the U.S., somewhere in the range of 120 to 130 trillion dollars. And it's like, at that point, you just kind of have to give up. Eventually, that money is going to come due some way or another. And either that money is going to be printed by a Federal Reserve, in which case, what's the U.S. annual, what's the current GDP? Somewhere like 4 or 5 trillion? You're talking about introducing $120 trillion into the economy, just poof out there. That means that dwarfs the current U.S. GDP, it's gonna become the small chip at the poker table. Like it's right now, it's a big big fish in a small pond. It's gonna be a small fish in the ocean once that unfunded liability money gets printed off. It's like,
So then it would seem their first step in correcting or reversing this before it explodes is to stop promising things, and the things that we can no longer promise, let the American people know, sorry, Social Security is going to fail.
Yeah.
If you're above this age, we can try and grandfather you in, and you'll still get, because you've been paying 60 years into this system. You were told you're going to get it. But if you're, under the age of 45 or 50 or whatever it is, you know, put your money into an IRA. We'll pay out whatever we can, and then that's it. You're just gonna have to bite the bullet, and I'd be fine with that. I don't care if I lose all my Social Security, as long as I don't pay another dime after today.
Well,
I'm cool with that. I'll go earn the rest.
Yeah,
and if I stop paying into it, I'll put that back into an IRA.
Yeah, well, for me, I know there's no possible way that I will ever see a dime from Social Security, because there's so many other people that are going to collect before me. You, I think, might slip through, but it's doubtful. Because I know people who are around your age, I think, so let's see. So, I mean, it's just because they promise too much and there's not enough in the account. And, well, the other thing about Social Security is it was supposed to be a fund that built interest, because it was a money kept in there that was earning money on it, like at a regular rate. And so even with the boomers, it might have been possible to pay all that. But the fact that people are living longer, and the fact they spent their initial, like they keep, like, oh, hey, there's all that money sitting there, no one's going to miss it, and they kept taking out and taking out. Well, it never got the chance to build up that interest required to keep the system sustainable. So I know for my generation, none of us are going to be able to collect. I'm not sure about yours, or I forget where the actual cutoff is on the age range. Like if you're over 40 at 2020, I think you have a chance of receiving it. But if you're under 40 in 2020, just better off not thinking about it.
I'm only 3 years older than you.
Oh, wait. So
I'm 38 next year.
Oh,
or this year. I'm 37.
Yeah, I think. I don't think you're gonna make it then.
I'm not banking on it.
Yeah, I think you like I said. I don't know the exact cutoff. I was just throwing out a number, but
yeah. But
I think if you're people under 40 after 2020.
But okay,
I know it's somewhere in that range. It's like a year or two off, or maybe.
So essentially, the American people are going to have to be told the truth. A lot of them are going to feel hurt and let down from the government.
Yep.
And that kind of stinks for whoever's in government right now, unless you're the one of those who's been offering all these ludicrous promises. But there needs to be this understanding that the government is not and never was there to provide sustenance for you. They're just simply there to organize a federal union and protect your borders, protect you from international invaders, and at least keep the peace between states. Well, that's it. That's all the federal government was supposed to do. Yeah. So they're going to have to kind of rip that Band-Aid off. And I understand with Social Security, it's just from my own personal thoughts, I would do kind of a grandfathering in, where if you're above such and such age, you'll still collect. If you're below that age, you don't get anything.
Yeah. So what people have suggested,
and you pay in for about 5 years just to cover those who are grandfathered in, and then you'll be paid nothing. So sorry, you young people are still going to have a little of this put on your shoulders, but there's no way around it.
Yeah. So what people have recommended as a way to mitigate, or because eventually there's going to be no money left to pay anybody. So what people have suggested is they have a cutoff. Like, so after X number of years, anybody else from that point on, we're going to extend the actual year or how old you can be to start receiving Social Security. Because right now it's what, 65. So they've talked about like, okay, we'll have a ramp up period. Like 3 years from now, you have to be 70 to start collecting. And then another 3 or 4 years, well, now you have to be 75 to start collecting. Well, I don't think they're ever actually going to 70. That seems no, because because I think what in the U.S. 80 is the average. So I think they're gonna so they would go from 65 to 70, and then from 70 to 75, and that would be a way of resolving this. But then they would also cut it off as like, hey, if you're under a certain age, then you get cut off completely. Even if you reach 75 or 80, you can't collect. So,
but are they still paying in? And
no.
If so, for how long?
So everybody who wouldn't be receiving would not be paying in. That is a way of saving. So at least the people who work their entire lives and don't have any type of retirement,
or maybe an opt-out.
Yeah,
a personal opt-out. They could just send out something with your federal taxes and say, within the next 5 years, do you opt out? You'll no longer pay in, but you're not eligible to receive, even if you are owed.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think there can be an opt-out before that, because then there's the people who are currently on Social Security wouldn't be able to. So there's people who are already on it, people who are about to receive it, and then people who are going to receive it very soon, and they don't have enough time to build up a retirement between now and when they're actually supposed to start receiving it. So 30 years should be plenty of time to build up a retirement, and enough of a retirement to not have to work. 30 years should be from the time you're so that's why I don't know the exact. There's a bunch of different recommendations on how to resolve this, but eventually it'd be like, yeah, if you are under a certain age, you're still going to have to pay in up to the point where there is just a cutoff. And it's like, yeah, everybody no longer paying into Social Security. Social Security is a dead program. Everybody who was currently collecting, well, there's enough money in there to keep you collecting until you die. Everybody who was still, was still promised that you're still paying into the system. There should be enough by the time you go to collect to keep you, till you die. And then it'll be, yes, okay. They might have to borrow some from outside funds or whatever, but at least that exploding or that ticking time bomb would be kind of diffused.
Well, then it would no longer be a debt, or ever increasing or accruing debt. That's one issue eventually resolved.
Yes.
And I think it could be resolved to where there is enough money to pay off those who are still supposed to receive it, and then have a cutoff to have that done, and not, I would say, within less than 10 years to have that part resolved.
Yeah, that is something that could be, in about 10 years could be resolved to the point where it's like, okay, it's now stable so long as everybody not...
There are no new people getting on it, and these people get what they get.
And that means that some people will have to pay in for, like, people like you and me who would have had to pay in for, like, 22 plus years. Because I think the one that I was looking at, they were talking about, 40. I don't know why I'm stuck on the number 40, but people under 40 or at 40 at a certain cutoff, like, you paid in for 22 years, you're not seeing a dime. All that is going to either keep the fund going or to help or to pay people who are currently on it.
But see, I'm fine with that, because as soon as it's cut off, my paycheck increases by a couple $100 a month. I keep that money, and now I can put that back into, my own personal IRA.
Yeah, so there was a video I watched a couple of years back from LBRY. There's a YouTube channel. They used to create a whole lot of videos, but economic videos and stuff like that. I don't know if they switched to a new format or anything like that. But I've seen that professor elsewhere. But he was talking about Social Security and how if you, instead of paying that same money into Social Security and getting retirement, if you instead invested that yourself and even getting a moderate interest rate of like 6%, you would have 3 to 4 times the amount of retirement income as you would under Social Security. And it's
Well,
like,
yeah, because everything you invest into, say, just an IRA, which is an actual retirement fund, that's all being invested into businesses, into things that make money and grow capital. Money invested in Social Security, like you were saying, the government keeps dipping in and taking money out like it was some personal piggy bank. It's just disappearing.
Yeah.
It never included the interest it was supposed to. So it's not like some sort of IRA that's being pushed out and used to grow capital. It's
yeah. So he was comparing if they never took any money out and was actually getting the interest rate it's supposed to be getting, you're still better off taking that exact same money and investing it yourself. And even if you invest it poorly, you're still going to do better than what the government has managed to do with Social Security.
Yeah, they just managed to steal billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Maybe trillions. That's all they've done.
Yeah.
Lied to everybody and stole it. So that's one system that I think we need to get rid of ASAP.
Mm-hmm.
Figure out how those who can't be grandfathered on, who've been paying for 30, 40, 50 years, will do something.
So,
but we got a lot of other programs as well. I think we need to get America back on track to, if you cannot afford it, don't get credit, don't lend it out, save up.
Well, then
buy it when you can pay it up front.
So Social Security
to the same standard.
Yeah, Social Security is one of those time bombs of unfunded liability. But that is a relatively fixed time bomb. And it could be resolved. Medicare and Medicaid, there is no solution to that. Those are eternal systems. Those will just continue to balloon. And right now, like I was saying, is like the unfunded liability for Social Security is somewhere around the range of...
Hospitals are now starting to deny those.
Yeah.
Like, they won't take patients who only have Medicare or Medicaid.
Yeah, it's not financially worth it. They're losing money at an
probably better off if
rate.
Just have cash and would pay them direct. I'm like, I'll take a little cut of that, but I'm not waiting on this.
Yeah. So Social Security is about $80 trillion, and right now Medicare and Medicaid are somewhere around 20 to 25-ish trillion. Those keep increasing exponentially, and if on their current trajectory, they will eventually surpass. They're going to expand faster than the Social Security time bomb, and you can like there's going to be a point where it outpaces it, and now our unfunded liability for Medicare and Medicaid is like 90 trillion or 100 trillion. It's like, the
reason I think that is growing faster and will become much more of a burden is because Social Security was just simply you taking part of your paycheck, basically being forced to. You have no say so. It's getting dumped in this giant piggy bank. That bank is supposed to be sitting there accruing interest to allow, some flexibility, but pay off later in life, so that way you have something to retire off of, and you get a little bit of that extra interest as well for having paid in for your however years. Whereas Medicaid and Medicare are completely based off of the healthcare industry as a whole, and as costs rise, then the expense of Medicaid and Medicare rise.
Yes.
And so government really screws everything up anytime they subsidize anything. They are the primary cause of healthcare being skyrocketed here.
Yeah.
Policy with drugs and medications, and the FDA basically starting Medicare and Medicaid in the first place, driving insurance policy prices up, premiums are up, coverage is down, and then allowing something stupid like Obamacare where you're fined because you can't afford your own health care. How are you going to pay a fine when you can't afford your own health care? Why was that even a thing?
It has been shot down. So that was the other thing that kind of happened.
That only lasted, 2 years, and now they're like, no, sorry.
So
scrap
it. The mandate was deemed unconstitutional.
Good.
That happened like last week or the week before. Federal court was like, the federal mandate makes this unconstitutional.
Even H&R Block was like, never mind the healthcare stuff. It looks like that's going to be disbanded, and we don't need insurance anymore. You're not going to have to pay a fine. I mean, I get it to work. I didn't have to worry about that part, but there's plenty of people who either opted out or just simply couldn't afford. So how can you just fine them for that?
Yeah.
That's not right.
Well, the other thing is that I can't remember if it was Tim Pool or if it was Ben Shapiro that was talking about this, but he said the reason Obamacare was held, because that went to a Supreme Court as well, Obamacare in general, but that was upheld as constitutional by the Supreme Court because of that mandate, because the Chief Justices, I forget the name of one of them, was writing, and he specifically said, because of the way this system works, even though it's not called a tax, it effectively works like a tax. In which case, this is the jurisdiction of the federal government. But now that that mandate is not there, that changes the entire argument that was presented by the Supreme Court as a reason to justify Obamacare being kept in place at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Tim Pool who was talking about this, because he was talking about things that he wants to keep around. I was like, oh, no, Tim. No, those are bad ideas. They sound good. I know you like them. I know you're a hippie liberal, but those are...
I mean, yeah.
The mandate... So, yeah, okay, it was definitely Tim Pool, because he was talking about the pre-existing conditions, and I'm like, oh, no. No, that's... If you have to provide insurance for a pre-existing condition... That's like buying insurance on a game of blackjack after you've already seen the dealer hit 21. It doesn't...
That's like saying someone can buy insurance on a car that was in an accident 2 months ago.
Yeah. It's like, well, my house is on fire. Can I buy insurance right now? Well, we can't deny you. It's a pre-existing condition of your house currently being on fire.
Forcing insurance companies to cover expenses. Yeah, basically, it's just forcing them to cover expenses.
Yeah, so the solution to that...
anything and everything after the fact, and pay less money to the insurance company while they pay the greater... Who would stay in business? Nobody. That would eliminate the insurance business completely. And while I'm 100% opposed to that, I think there are some instances where being able to get insurance...
No, insurance is not the way to handle people in that situation, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But
I'm just saying overall insurance. If that's the way they want to handle healthcare, if they applied that to any other insurance industry, they would tank very quick. Oh,
even in healthcare, they would tank. Which this is a reason why premiums went up. It's not just because the gold and silver packages had minimum. I mean, there was the minimums they had to offer people as part of these packages for Obamacare, but the other part of that was to offset the cost of pre-existing conditions, because the person with the pre-existing condition, they can only charge so much. I mean, even
but medical expenses are going to be
so for the insurance company, somebody with a pre-existing condition is always going to cost them money, no matter what. Doesn't matter how rich the person is paying into the insurance. If they're buying insurance, they're getting more out of it than they are spending into it if they have a pre-existing condition. Right. Otherwise, they wouldn't have it. So the insurance company has to pay out, which means they have to be able to make up that from some other source of revenue. The way that they resolved to do that was they're getting, taxpayer money through Obamacare, and the other way is they're raising their premiums for other people. I guess maybe not taxpayer funding through Obamacare. They're getting people that have to get insurance, so they've got a guaranteed customer pool. And again, like I was talking about earlier with the supply and demands, the more customers you have, you'd rather have a ton of customers and you're making a small profit off of each than having a, one customer and making a decent profit, but not a, right? It's better to make $1 off of 1,000 people than to make $100 off of one person, right? That's... Yeah, so they'd rather have a bunch of customers, like, hey, you got guaranteed customers for us. Well, now they no longer have the guaranteed customers, and they've also, like, hey, they had to increase their prices as part of Obamacare, and also to offset the pre-existing conditions. Sorry, I probably was all over the place. Hopefully that was not as confusing as it now sounds to me.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah, so... if they just got rid of Obamacare altogether, the solution, which was proposed like at least 5 years back, if not longer, is eliminate the state restrictions on insurance. if you are an insurance provider in Alabama, you should be able to provide insurance for all 50 states. If you are an insurance provider in New York, you should be able to provide insurance for all 50 states. It shouldn't be restricted. You shouldn't have to apply and become an insurance provider for each state. That should just be, hey, you're an insurance provider. You provide insurance for the entire country. Because that opens up competition, and a company that is maybe restricted to Alabama or maybe restricted to Florida or maybe restricted to California or something.
I think that would unify certain, like Blue Cross Blue Shield. Mm-hmm. Each state has their own version of it.
Yep.
So, yeah, you would say that's leaning more towards monopolies, but there are plenty of other competing companies in the insurance industry.
Yes.
Allstate and, you know,
Cigna's, Cigna's a huge one.
Yeah. There's other insurance companies, at least in the healthcare industry, besides. But if they were able to kind of basically operate as United Front within the United States instead of having 50 different company branches that operate differently depending on state laws and regulations, and you can only operate within this confines. Now you're an entity just like any other business that can sell or operate anywhere in the U.S., right?
Yeah, Home so Depot. What that would allow them to do is consolidate. Like I said, instead of having different lawyers and different offices in each state and all different policies and different systems to manage the different policies, okay, now we've just got one blanket policy, like anybody who, you know, can come get this policy. Yeah.
Yeah,
it simplifies it for them so they can reduce their internal costs.
Less confusion for the hospitals. Now they know exactly which providers, because I think it would kind of lessen how many different providers that they're going to have to check with or deal with, and whether or not they're going to get the full money. Now they know providers. This is definitely Cigna. Doesn't matter what state you live in, and that would put a lot more stuff in network.
Yeah. Pretty much everything would be in network at that point. I mean, it's very rare that you would have a
substantially.
Yeah, I mean, there are some offices that wouldn't be in any network and stuff like that, but it's pretty much like if you've got insurance because your insurance is good across the country, what hospital wouldn't take it? I mean, very few hospitals wouldn't take that insurance. That's the reason for the in-network, out-network sort of thing is usually because a hospital's like, well, you know, that we only accept the ones in this local area or whatever, or something. There's usually it's confined based on something along those lines. Or maybe hey they don't pay, or they don't, you know, it takes forever. We got to fight them tooth and nail to get compensated. There might be that sort of thing going on. But the other thing so not only would that make it streamlined for each insurance provider, but that would create a whole lot more competition, which competition naturally lowers prices as well. Now, we didn't talk about that when talking about pricing, but competition has been proven over time that the more competition there is, they have to reduce their prices. Like, I guess we kind of did with Sony, right? I don't think Sony wanted to sell their product at a loss, and if they could have sold the same number of products at a profit, if they weren't competing with Microsoft, they probably wouldn't have sold the product as at much of a loss. But because they had to compete with Xbox,
they were competing with Sega, because Sega still had that Dreamcast system on the first one, and Nintendo, which has been around for like a decade, 2 decades before.
Yeah.
So they already had competition. Plus, new guy in the market, Microsoft already has billions of dollars.
Yeah.
That's what allowed that whole console genre to kind of explode.
Yeah. So if Sony was the only console on the market, they could have charged an extra $50 and still had a relatively predictable, like, hey, we're going to get about the same amount of customers. Okay, we'll just charge that extra $50 and that reduces our losses. But, hey, if they've got introduced competition, now they're competing with all these 3 other systems. They're like, okay, we have to take this big loss. And insurance providers would kind of fall in the same group. It's like, okay, we don't want Cigna to take all of our business. All right, our prices are too high. We're losing customers to Cigna. Drop the prices. We're going to reduce our profits, but we got to maintain that customer base. Oh, we found a way of incorporating these systems together, so that cuts our cost of providing insurance. All right, drop the prices now. That will start taking business away from Cigna.
Oh,
yeah, I mean they're going to start competing and.
So, I have on my insurance plan. I picked an HRA, which is it's like a savings plan.
Yeah, it's a health. I don't know what the R stands for. I know HSA, health savings account or health savings plan.
It's
But
pretty
what's
much
the
the same thing.
HRA?
Maybe it is called an HSA.
Mm-hmm.
I thought when I was first signing up for it, it was an HRA. But
yeah, I'm not familiar with the RA.
The money taken out of my paycheck is deposited into basically a health savings account, and then my company I work for matches that.
Yes.
And then it sits and actually accrues and rolls over every year.
Yeah.
So the more I don't use it, the more money is saved up, and doctor's visits and regular things are all covered under that.
Mm-hmm.
There was no copay. It was also taken out of that until Obamacare, and now there is a copay, and it's no longer coming out of that. So I lost a little bit of the benefit of it. Yeah. But since I don't go to the hospital ever, all that money has just gone to, my kids and their checkups and stuff like that. And I've got a couple of $1,000 saved up. So if there's a broken arm or an emergency, it's already saved up. Now, what if you could do something if they kind of allow the interstate insurance policies? So basically companies could now kind of consolidate all of their various offices within the states, kind of have a more solid company, but also do almost like a lending plan in an HRA where they could take a percentage. You would still have to say, hey, that would be part of the policy. So you'd have to sign for it, but they could take 10%, invest that elsewhere. They get a return. You get a small percentage increase in your HRA on top of what you're already paying into it. And the hospitals or the insurance companies make money. Then they would have a little bit of an extra back buffer to cover if there's a pre-existing condition or, big blows that happen.
So that's essentially the suggested solution for dealing with pre-existing conditions. I mean, maybe not those exact lines, but something. It's basically, yes, having a health savings or a health retirement. I don't know what the R stands. I'm trying to think. Health reserve account.
Yeah, maybe it is an HSA. Maybe I'm.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep getting thrown off by the R. But yeah, basically having a health savings account that builds interest and that can be used. And it's like, well, if a company has something along those lines, like a company or the insurance company or a neighborhood or something along those, well, if they establish something like that for people with pre-existing conditions, well, then they just keep tapping into that for those pre-existing conditions, and that doesn't hurt their bottom line. That's essentially the solution. That is like, that you wouldn't need the Obamacare. You have to take these pre-existing conditions. You can charge whatever you want, but you have to take these. It's like, no. You provide them with an account, and maybe you provide them with more of a startup than they are able to generate on their own, but eventually that'll start building up and getting interest, and then it should be enough to handle their existing condition. And then it doesn't cost the insurance provider
money where the interest is paying for, insulin.
Yes. So, and it's an account that builds up interest, and it's specifically for the purpose of dealing with that pre-existing condition. It's not building up interest for their retirement. It's not building up interest for them to spend on a business or them to go blow on. No, it's specifically for that. So that is the preferable solution for dealing with pre-existing conditions. Is you establish an account, does nothing but build up money, and they could even pool resources together for people with pre-existing conditions. Like, we're all going to pool our money together. We're putting it into this one system that generates. Well, see, the other thing is the health savings accounts are not taxed. Whereas if you put your money into a mutual fund, it can build up interest, and you can use that interest to pay your medical bills, but you get taxed on that. Whereas this health savings account, because it's specifically just for your health needs, it can build up interest, and you can take the savings off of that to pay for treatments, and that account will just continually build up. And that should be, and it'll reach that point where it sustains the treatment for as long as your pre-existing condition is, or lasts, or until you die, or whatever it is for the.
See, I think something else that could benefit from that is if maybe you have a slightly reduced policy price if upon death, anything in that savings account can be transferred to people with pre-existing conditions, because it's not a regular bank account and it's not like you're going to pass on something. The insurance is it's insurance for while you're alive, obviously.
Yeah.
It's not a regular
dead people don't need health insurance.
Bank account. It's you're paying monthly to make sure if something happens, I can get taken care of while I'm alive. After, if it's saved up, I think it should go somewhere, not direct to the insurance companies, but if you can opt to pull that in for pre-existing accounts or something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So with the health savings account, that saves insurance companies money in the long run, because you are spending your money. So it doesn't cost them anything for you to have a health savings account. Unless they lose, unless whatever they invested in operates at a loss and they don't quite get the interest. But
correct, because typically you use whatever's saved up, they'll cover a bit until a certain premium. Oh no, I think with my plan, I use up whatever's in there.
Yeah.
And then I have to set a certain deductible after.
Yeah.
And then if insurance kicks in after, and they'll cover everything else.
So that's why they started using this thing, is because it saves the insurance company money, because you're depleting your savings account before you ever touch their insurance. So they're like, yeah, you just keep putting money in that account and using it whenever you want it.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost us anything. We just let it sit there and ride and grow. And the more it grows, the better it is for us, because it doesn't cost us any money. So and usually the interest on the health savings account, usually they're making more money. Like they're making, if they're paying you an extra $60 a year in interest, that means they're probably making $120 off of your health savings account.
Yeah.
So if they do operate at a slight loss, that's not going to hurt their butt. They're probably not ever going to pay you more than they earn. They're not gonna lose money that way. So it's like, yeah, if that's the case, that whole savings account doesn't cost them a dime. It saves them a lot of money. So it's like, oh, we're just gonna transfer that over to a different customer. All right, whatever. No skin off our nose. That saves us money, because again, that if they have a larger pool or a buffer to use up before they tap into their insurance, that saves us more money. So yeah, sure, transfer it all you want. Yay, we win.
I mean, it is in essence a savings account that's specific for healthcare. It's not like you're losing anything. You still get your money out of it. If you ever have to tap into it, it's your money to begin with. So just putting it into a savings account, it's kind of a win-win all around.
Yeah. Saves the insurance company money, helps you, saves you on not being charged as much by your insurance company, provides you the chance that you could transfer it. Although I don't know if any actual insurance companies offer that, where you transfer the health savings account over. I don't see why they wouldn't. It seems.
See, if they would offer a slightly lower premium, like a monthly input, and also a lower deductible, where upon death that's transferred to another, like a pool for pre-existing accounts or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd opt into that.
Yep.
That's less money coming out every month, and it's a less deductible in case an emergency happens. But that also means anything that might be left over or saved up afterwards, they use that for something else.
Yep. And those are the types of solutions that Obamacare will not allow, because insurance companies have to fall within the parameters outlined by Obamacare. And it's like, well, if you have a solution like that, you're like, hey, I want to provide this for my customers. Oh, that's not approved by the Obamacare system. Our hands are tied. As far as I know, that's the situation they're stuck in. There's not going to be a whole lot of room for innovation for these insurance companies. Just strike out the Obamacare, which there is the possibility that Obamacare goes back to the Supreme Court now that it no longer has that provision for the mandate. Without that mandate, it may be ruled unconstitutional.
Yeah, it's an additional.
It's just an additional burden that is specifically for health insurance companies, where they have to adhere to these certain rules. They have to take customers they wouldn't otherwise take, And now they don't have a guaranteed customer pool. This, without that mandate, it's an overall loss to these insurance companies.
And they can't force that on businesses. That's not common.
So that should be ruled unconstitutional. We'll see how that pans out. Man, we talked about a whole lot of other stuff I had not expected to, but I think what we eventually started with talking about the inflation and all of that.
Yeah.
Because of rampant inflation, the economy is growing, and it's growing really, really well as far as actual produced goods and services, things that are physical and tangible that we have provided. That's all on the up and up, and it's growing. It's not growing as fast as inflation, especially because of the fractional reserve lending, and especially because of the unfunded liabilities.
Yep.
So eventually, there's going to be a time when it's like, we got to pay the piper. Eventually, all of that is going to come into collision, and a crash is inevitable.
Well, that's why I brought this up in the first place, is because you said, yeah, Trump's pretty much guaranteed 2020 unless within this next year we have a massive economic decline. Then everyone's going to point the finger, especially Democrats, and say, nope, this was all your fault. Even though, not really, he's the guy who's been staving it off.
Yeah. So
we were told back in 2016 we were going to have a massive economic crash. And I know there was a ton of reports in 2018, especially near the holiday season. So, but is there a way to reverse it? Which why I kind of got into that.
Yeah.
As far as, can we start to get it into, instead of inflation, a deflation state? I know it's going to take work, and that's not going to happen in like the next year, but at least starting to plan for that. And if not, what is the best solution? Just to hurry up, kind of rip the Band-Aid off and let's get through a decline, and then how to rebuild after in a more stable manner?
Yeah. So to get rid of inflation would be to eliminate the three things that are the sources of inflation. There might be a fourth or a fifth, but those are the three that I know of. I can't think of any others. So yeah, get rid of those three. That means no new promises, no more printed money. We have to make do with the money that is currently in the system. No, Federal Reserve is not authorized to print.
And not just new promises, but how do we get rid of old promises that don't work? Where we got on security discussion, healthcare stuff.
Yeah, so the solution to resolve the Social Security, there have been proposed suggestions, like I said, by upping the age at which person can receive and putting it, staging it, and then cutting off, right? People below a certain age can't receive it at all, although they've paid into the system, and then staggering it out. That would make that sustainable. And as long as nobody else puts their hand in the kitty, then that would be contained. The health, Medicare and Medicaid, that's the sort of thing you just got to rip that Band-Aid off, along with a lot of other welfare systems. But for starters, the cutting the promises and cutting the printing of money, that would be a good way to stop the current inflation. But see, I don't know if we could stop printing money. I think that is something that's going to have to continue at the rate because of fractional reserve lending. So in order to resolve this, we would have to mandate that banks stop fractional reserve lending. That would be the first mandate. It's like, fractional reserve lending outlawed. Banks that currently practice it, well, because there's no way to recover, you can't do it with future loans, with future deposits, although the current stuff that's on the books would have to remain that way. They'd have to kind of revamp their entire structure to set aside new accounts that don't allow fractional reserving, and they'd have to probably restructure a lot of their stuff. And it's like, everything that is currently in place would have to kind of maintain what it is.
Yeah, I guess
and then start a whole.
And what they've already loaned out, they just need to recoup the money. But future loans from this date onwards. Yeah,
but we can't imagine you're just gonna have to cross that off the books altogether. That would be unreasonable, and that would trigger a collapse as well. So that's like, okay, well, you've got this banking bubble.
Oh, dude, see, but that's partly. I I think I would have the same effect as what we had in 2008.
Yeah.
The loans will basically disappear, and now the loans that are out there are getting defaulted on, and no one can get new loans. Housing market drops. Probably the auto industry as well. Those are the two primary, like, big things for loans.
Well, yeah, so that would be no new loans, sure. But then again, that's loans they shouldn't be issuing in the first place.
Correct. But
So
since they are issuing it, at least those two industries are...
Well, here's the thing, is credit unions and things along those lines would still be in the business of giving out loans, because they're not participating. So
that's true. They've always been, I mean, they're pretty much...
Yeah. So what we would...
Because they've got their guidelines on how much money they need to back it.
Yeah, so banks that are involved in the FDIC and the Federal Reserve and all that sort of thing, there would have to be kind of like a quarantine on those. Be like, yeah, you guys are stuck in there in your bubble. We're trying to contain that inevitable pop and explosion. And then I think they would have to do is establish credit unions outside of that.
In the next 10 years, fix your loans before then, because if you go bankrupt and cave in, you get no bailout this time.
Yeah.
So
that would be no TARP, no bailouts, no nothing like that would have to be. So contain the fractional reserve as best as it can be contained right now. Like no new fractional reserve loan, no new fractional reserve accounts and all that sort of thing would have to be mandated. And there's that's got to be. So the existing ones can continue as they are. Because otherwise that would cause an internal collapse.
I'll say dissolution of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, dissolution of the Federal Reserve is something that would have to occur as well.
Don't need it.
Again, this is all what should be done. So the other thing so right now we've got several bubbles in our economy based around the fractional reserve lending system. And those main bubbles right now are the stock market, housing, and automobiles. Those are the three huge bubbles. If one of those bursts, it's going to cause a chain reaction, and all three will burst. That's kind of unavoidable. Yeah. So similar to the like I said, like you were saying, the 2008 crash as well. What we can do is those are bubbles that are inflating. So what we can do is limit the amount of growth in those bubbles, which is outlawing fractional reserve would do that. It would keep the bubbles wouldn't pop, they wouldn't necessarily deflate, but they wouldn't be growing at the rapid rate they're currently growing. And what we do in the meantime is build up the rest of the economy. And there would still be loans to go around through other banking institutions.
Still a loan. They just need to get more of their money back in before they can issue loans.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have more money on hand before they can issue. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what that would do is with the outlaw. So what you're saying is there's less money in the system to loan out. What that should trigger is banks to offer higher interest rates, because they need money to loan out. So they say, instead of right now most interest rate, even a CD, you're lucky if you get 4%, or I think some of them go up to like 6% maybe, but usually it's around 2 or 3% in a certificate of deposit. But banks are like, we need cash now. Let's jump that up to 10%. We're going to guarantee you 10% interest. They're going to have people coming in, depositing money into their banks so they can continue loaning out. Because they're not going to loan out at a 10%. They're like, yeah, we are going to pay our customers who give us money 10%, but we're making 50% on that. So we give them 10%, we keep 40%. All right, deal for us. It's not as sweet as we get money from the Federal Reserve and we get charged 1% and we make 50%, so we're making 49% off of that. It's not as sweet as that deal, but hey, you'll take 40% over 0%, right? So, and then banks would keep doing this and be like, okay, we don't have enough money in our vaults. All right, up the interest rates. So like, hey, we are now giving 15% on anybody who 15% if you deposit your stuff in there now. We need cash now.
I wonder if those banks are the ones that are hindering all of that. Like, are they the ones still continually pushing for fractional reserve, even though they know eventually it's going to come to an economic decline? Because they have the backing of a bailout.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because they're getting the most bang for their buck by borrowing from the Federal Reserve. Why should they give you, 5% interest on the money you deposit when they're like, the Federal Reserve is only charging us 1%. We're going to borrow as much as we can from the Federal Reserve because we're making money is money, right? $100 from you or $100 from the Federal Reserve. If we've got to pay you $4 for every 100 you lend us, and we've only got to pay the Federal Reserve $1 for every 100, we're going to go with the cheaper guy. But
Yep.
If the Federal Reserve is not allowed to fractionally reserve lend to banks, banks are not allowed to use their own fractional reserve policy. They're like, well, now we have to have the cash on hand to lend out. What can we do to get more cash on hand? Well, we have to offer people more return on their savings to get them to deposit more money into our banks. So you're going to see, if we implement all that, yes, these bubbles will still exist, but banks will be like, we need cash. If you've got cash, we're going to give you better interest rates than you could get on the stock market. That's what they're going to have to be like. Yeah, the stock market, you're good luck getting 8% or 10%. At our bank, we're giving you 15%. We're going to give you 20%. We're going to give you 30%. Because banks loan money out to commercial businesses and home loans and stuff like that. They're not making 20% on that. They're making like 50 to 200% on that. Like over the course of the they're making
plus the interest. The 30-year mortgage gives them.
Yeah. I
think it doubles the cost of the house.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right.
They're making bank on that. So like, yeah, we can afford to give you 20% interest. And it's like, stock market's like, we can't compete with 20% interest. I mean, good if you invest into Apple before it becomes a billion-dollar company, you can make more than 20%. But good luck picking that needle out of the haystack. If you got a bank that is just like, dude, give us $1,000, you're guaranteed 20% on that in 1 year. You'd be like, okay. I will take that guaranteed money. And that's what banks would be providing, because they're like, yeah, we need cash now. We're willing to offer people an increase in interest because we need cash because we can't get it from the Federal Reserve anymore. That would trigger people depositing and saving money into banks. Now, the economy would still keep growing, because people still would need to buy consumables. People would still need to buy all that stuff. That's the crazy thing. People talk about deflation. It's like, oh, deflation. Well, deflation triggers increases in interest on savings.
Well, I would just say, who's sitting there thinking inflation is a good thing?
I don't know.
I think the general populace has the idea that inflation is not that great as long as it's, maintained at a low level. So wouldn't the exact opposite of something that's not that great be something that's okay?
So the Keynesian economists like Paul Krugman, he seems to think inflation is a good thing. A lot of people in his that is something Maynard Keynes advocated for inflation, because he said it doesn't matter where the money's being spent as long as it's being spent, which means you can increase the money supply, which is what inflation is, and that creates more money to go through the system, and that creates wealth. That was their foolish idea of, and there's a lot of economists, like a lot of people who still believe that, and because they think inflation is ultimately good because it means more money is circulating through the system.
That's not money circulating. It's currency, fiat currency.
Yeah, they don't quite understand that.
Money's not prone to inflation. That's why it's called money.
Yeah, they don't understand that, because this is Paul Krugman, who wrote that the U.S. should issue a $1 trillion coin and then give that to countries to repay our debt. It's like, wait, print a $1 trillion coin and then just hand that to a country. Look, we printed this. It's worth $1 trillion. Debt's paid. That's like that sounds like an Onion article, but he wrote that. I think that was in the New Yorker as a legitimate. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I think he writes for the New Yorker. I can't remember which. Yeah, or it might be the Post or something like that. But he's a economist that writes for them in the editorial section, I think. I was like, you wrote that like legitimately, like not tongue-in-cheek, ironic. No, that was a legitimate suggestion. Like you thought that was a good idea. And he's supposedly a Nobel Prize winner, and I'm just.
That sounds like it's Starbucks paying their employees in Starbucks dollars only.
Yeah.
Like it's not real money. It's just something they made up and said, well, just bring that in and get all the coffee you want for life. We're no longer going to pay you. So this is for payment.
Yeah.
That's no good.
Oh.
I guess they'll survive off black coffee and Scotties.
Well, there are a surprising number of people who believe in the Keynesian economic theories. And a lot of them advise presidents and are involved in Washington.
Man, that is scary.
Yeah.
They don't understand what value means.
No.
At all.
So there's three schools of thought. There's the Austrian school, there's the Chicago school, and then there's the Keynesian school. So the Keynesians, they think as long as money is there,
as long as there's transactions happening, things being bought and sold, things are good.
Yes. And if things ever slow down and stop being bought and sold at the same rate, then you just increase the currency supply. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then more trades happen. And that's good. That means that's their that's a simplified version of their viewpoint. Chicago school is a little more conservative. They don't buy the print money and just as long as money's flowing, it doesn't matter where it is. That's good. That means wealth is being created. They're a little more reserved, but they're of the mindset that it needs to be a balance and ebb and flow of inflation and deflation. And inflation and deflation, it's not a good thing to have too much of one or the other. So we need to manage the money supply to make sure, deflation when the economy needs it, inflation when the economy needs it, and just keep going back and forth. And it's a balancing act between the two. That's essentially an oversimplified version of their views.
Well, think of it this way, right?
Yeah.
If the American dollar goes to a deflation, and now you can purchase more with that dollar, but it's harder to get into a market that you haven't put anything, right? So a high school student, 16 and looking for a job, now people are wanting qualified people in these positions because the money they're handing out is worth more.
Yeah.
Just getting paid that $7 an hour because of deflation is what getting paid, $15 an hour years ago was, right? It's kind of the reverse.
Yeah.
It has that same weight. You're getting paid that same value. So they could actually drop the minimum wage, and
so that's something that would have to happen as well. They would have to eliminate minimum wage altogether.
Correct.
That's how we would fix the
currencies. Even the penny value would go up.
Yeah. So to fix the situation with a pending economic collapse, so we'd have to isolate the areas that are causing the bubbles to blow up, so that way they stop inflating. Isolate the Federal Reserve, so that way it can't do any more damage than it's already done. Isolate the damage of unfunded liabilities. And then get rid of the minimum wage. Because if we're encouraging deflation, and we're encouraging banks to get money from customers so they can lend out.
And only lend out when they have money to back it up.
Yeah. If that is the case, we're forcing deflation. That would be the natural result of all of this. Because deflation is forced, you cannot maintain the minimum wage.
Correct.
So minimum wage would have to be abolished. And that would allow providers to be like, okay, we're offering all of our current employees. It's not like you're going to be like, okay, you earn $7.50 an hour, but because of deflation, we're going to drop you to $5 an hour. No, you would leave and you would go work somewhere else. You'd be like, no, screw you. I don't care if I've been here 30 years. You dock my pay just because of deflation. I'm out. So what they would have to do is like, okay, existing employees, we can't lower your pay. Otherwise, we're going to lose all of our existing employees. We're going to maintain that as existent. Hiring new employees, we won't pay them as much.
Correct.
And we just continually lowering our introductory rates for new employees. And that's
advancement rates, and by the time they've been there 30 years,
Yeah.
they'll be getting paid less. But due to deflation, they're now buying more with that
Yeah.
money than they did people, previous who were making more.
So eventually it's going to get to the point where they're like, okay, the people who have been here the longest, and yeah, you're more experienced, but now we've got enough replacements for you at the cheaper rate. We're gonna tell you to
take a lower pay or leave.
Yeah, take a lower pay or leave. But they'd have to get to that point first. But if
Correct.
you eliminate minimum wage, like if there's a minimum wage cutoff, they don't have that tool, and there's no way that they could overcorrect, and they would always be overpaying their employees, and there's nothing they could do about it. So the more deflation, the more it's like
profit margins, less likely to stay in business.
Yes. So that would have to be removed in order to save us from an economic collapse. So the other thing that needs to occur, and this is something like I think I've brought this up before, what Trump did in his first 100 days is changes to the energy policies in the U.S. And within this year, the U.S. is now energy independent for the first time in several decades. I don't know how many exactly, but that is like unheard of amazing, because if he is allowed another 4 years at that rate, that alone might be enough. It's not gonna eliminate a economic collapse, but it might propel the economy far enough so that it can catch up to those bubbles. Because it's like so picture it like a balloon, right? You blow up this balloon, you fill it up with, it gets huge with helium, but it has without it letting any air out, if you let sand fill up that balloon, like if sand is pouring into that balloon and maybe a little bit of air is escaping, here and there, but eventually if you pop that balloon, it's not going to deflate and just go down to the original size. It's going to shrink to the size of that actual sand or whatever substance. It's not going to pop and then go everywhere. It's going to and then shrink to the size of whatever of substance is inside it. That's kind of what the energy policy Trump did. He's injecting, because what that does is that's going to lower the overall gas prices. We're going to start to see gas prices in the U.S. drop and hopefully get back. Like you said, that it was under $2. That's like
just the other day it was like
the first time in over a decade.
I don't remember ever seeing $1 or something like that since quite a while ago.
Yeah. So we can expect that to continually drop because we are no longer dependent on foreign oil. If they up their prices, oh well, screw off. We don't care. We've got enough of our own supply of energy. We don't need you. You're going to see gas prices drop and hopefully get to around, maybe half a cent per gallon or something, or not half a cent, half a dollar per gallon or somewhere in that range.
That would be nice.
The cost of gas, like I was saying before, that's something everybody needs, like families, but more importantly, companies. Transportation you got to look at the numbers on how much of the United States economy is dependent on transportation. These huge semi-trucks hauling stuff back and forth, these refrigerated trucks, how much money...
distribution Amazon does, FedEx, UPS, and if cost of shipping goods drops...
Yeah, if you're talking about...
the consumer goods cost?
Yeah, the cost of gas dropping drastically, like getting cut in half and cut in half again, that reduces the amount of money being spent on transportation for these companies. That lowers their overall... that frees up so much money in the economy to be spent elsewhere. And that generates genuine wealth. Like I was saying to begin with, doing the same with less. and doing the same with that much less. It's the same amount of gasoline, but at that reduced price, and because we go through so much gas on a single day in the United States, it's like the amount of cars on the road, the amount of trucks on the road in a single day in the U.S. is mind-boggling to think about. So if every car that's on that road in a single day, it's now costing a quarter of what it used to do the same thing, that is a huge economic boon. And because of things like that, the U.S. might be able to catch up economically to the point where what we have on paper because of these bubbles, we might exceed that. What's that, Lord of War? I know you mentioned that previously. Like, there's a point in the film where he's bragging about his wealth, right? He pretends to be, like, he rents out a hotel, and he's, trying to woo this model woman, and he rents a jet and paints a logo on the side, and the paint's still drying when they take off and all that sort of stuff. And he's basically exaggerating his wealth because he's not actually that wealthy. He almost went bankrupt trying to impress this woman. And later on in the film, because of he gets to the point where his business exceeds what he was bragging about. Because he's selling so much, he's got so many business, he's got more money than he could ever imagine. And it's like, he was bragging about it, and it was all fake and phony, but his business exploded, and it surpassed the fake and phony.
Yeah.
Yeah. So granted, that was a film and all that sort of thing, but the U.S. economy is currently on track to do that, provided we don't keep exaggerating the bragging. We don't keep exaggerating the lie, because we are currently on track with our energy policies in place, and if we move towards more nuclear, again, that's going to cut down power costs for families, which frees up more money to go to other stuff, which frees up more money to go be spent in other more useful places other than paying for power.
See, now that concept would make more sense. You brought up two different issues that would actually not increase the number of bills, but increase the availability for circulation, out printing. Why wouldn't that occur to Keynesian economists?
I have no idea.
Just make more available by making things easier, cheaper to produce, more convenient. Circulate what we have.
So I'm not quite sure why it doesn't occur to them, but I can tell you what bothers me more than things like this don't occur to them. What bothers me more is that they've read what Keynes has written, and they accept that as something that makes sense to them, and they subscribe to that. So if you read what he's written, there's one example he gave that jumped out to me the most, and that kind of similar to Marx, where it's like, the from each according to their need, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, that sort of thing. Keynes proposed a system where the U.S. government would print treasury bonds, put them in a contained case, pay somebody to bury that case, and then offer people permission to go dig up those treasury bonds and pay for that permission. And that would stimulate the economy.
Wouldn't that be like getting gold and going to put that in some gold mines, and people have to pay you to go?
Yeah. It's like, what the? And it's not, again, like Krugman, that's not a joke. It's like, you just paid an absorbent amount of money to have somebody dig a hole and then refill it. What the?
Have people pay you back for what you wasted burying this in the ground.
What the?
And what do they get after they dig it out? That still doesn't give any value to what you just buried.
No, none. It's a like, and I was reading, I'm like, dude, did he seriously suggest, like, and I'm like, this has got to be him making fun of someone. No, that was a legitimate proposal. And I'm like, how can you? And it's not something in an obscure writing. That is, I forget the name of the book. That is like when you look up John Maynard Keynes, that's the first book. That is his magnum opus, like the one he's known for. I forget the name of it. It's something boring like Standard of Economy or something.
But now that's that's if you don't necessarily understand the way the economy works. You're looking at it from a government perspective on they're the ones that issue currency. If you go to just a solo economy, right? You as a person, you can't print your own money. That's not an option. So if you want to have more money circulating, you got two options: go make more money or save. That way you can spend it on something later. So rather than going out and eating the steak, you say, hey, I'm just going to have a salad, or I'm just going to have some ramen for a couple of days, save up part of my paycheck, and then next week I'll have some extra money to spend on what it is I do want. That's more money you've put in your own pocket to circulate to go get something else you want because you saved somewhere else. You have not increased your funds at all. You just shifted around what you're spending money to focus it more on what you want, or go get a second job or do something to increase your cash flow. You can't actually print any more money. So wouldn't it be the same concept for everybody?
Should be. It's surprisingly not. There are a lot of people like Krugman and people who subscribe to John Maynard Keynes' economic theories who suggest that it's bad for an individual to be in debt, but it is good for a government to be in debt.
Why would anybody want to be in debt?
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Like, it's bad. So when you go into debt, that's bad. That puts you on the line. But when governments go into debt, well, that's great.
Because they can just print money. Where did they? Okay.
Yeah. It's the
solution. They like that governments just make the money.
Yeah. So I can kind of understand why they don't see things as far as like, oh, if we free up economic resources, which we saw demonstrated in the most profound ways. Like, again, I'm bringing up the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. Those freed up resources allowed people to spend elsewhere. Economy boomed. The people who don't see that, I can understand them not seeing those sorts of things. They see the economy booming and they don't understand exactly why. I can understand them not seeing that. I can't understand them looking at the example of John Maynard Keynes saying, we're going to pay people to bury something. People are going to pay to dig up that something, and then and that gives that something value, and then they can go and spend that something, and I'm like, wait, what is all this contrived nonsense? That's like saying, I will pay you $1, you immediately give me $10. That's essentially what the system results in, right? I pay you $1, you give me $10.
I pay $1 to make $1, and then you pay me $1 to cover the $1 I just made. That's what that sounds like.
Yes.
I'm paying $1 to have the $1 printed, and then you're paying $1 to retrieve that $1 that I had printed, and because you just paid me for the $1 I'd printed now has value. That's just a net loss.
Yeah, it's going to be a net loss because of all the time spent doing all the other stuff. It's like you might end up with more money at the end because it was a treasury bond worth more than what somebody would pay to dig up a treasury bond. But overall, it's a net loss because nothing was produced. All you have is you gave $1 to the government gave you $10 back, and now there's $9 more in circulation, which doesn't necessarily it's going to decrease the spending value, maybe not of you, but of somewhere in the economy, because the amount of goods and services hasn't increased. And instead, you just wasted time burying and digging this thing up.
If you were the only one doing that, then you would profit. If everybody's doing that, then everybody has more of these currency bonds. So now a loaf of bread costs $130.
Yeah, it's just like what I was saying with the Disgaea thing. If everybody pays the government $1 and gets $10 back, you added a 0. Yay!
Yeah.
That it's
and everyone's a little more dirty.
And everybody wasted a day, burying and digging things up.
Yeah.
And
why doesn't everybody just do that? We would have so much money.
I could start a business paying people to bury things, and then people will pay me to dig them up.
Bury them, and then you pay us to dig these bonds up that are.
If that was a legitimate thing, a business could do that and somehow make money. I don't understand.
Yeah, there's only two businesses No, three businesses I could see. Foundations and swimming pools.
No, I'm so there are things maybe as an entertainment value, like a treasure hunt or something like, but but as a way to run an entire economy or like somebody who could read what he's writing, get to that point, and still be like, yeah, this guy's good. He knows what he's talking about. That I read that and like I don't see how any
paragraph. If all else fails, ask your parents for a bigger allowance. Is that the last paragraph?
Sadly, no, but that seems to make sense. So I can't understand. Like, so that is his like the work that he's most known for contains that actual suggestion, and I'm like, everybody who is a member of Keynesian economics has to have read this. How do you read through this book, get to that point, and be like, this guy is legitimate, and still subscribe to his idea? Like, even if you don't know Austrian school, even if you don't know Chicago school, that should strike you as an absurd scenario that cannot possibly be of benefit to anyone involved in it.
See, that's not really true. Just because he wrote it, most people did not read it. They talked with someone else who talked with someone else who says they know about it. I've been in a couple of different discussions on Discord with socialists.
Oh, right.
And I even brought up Communist Manifesto. I'm like, okay, well, that's not actually in there. He said this, and I opened it up, went to a page, and I was reading it, and I was like, have you ever actually read the Communist Manifesto? Do you know what you're espouting here? And he's like, well, no, I haven't read through it, but I know what it's supposed to be about. I'm like, well, no, because it's in my face. Me and my brother have been discussing this for weeks.
Yeah, and it's only like 20-ish pages.
This is what he wanted. I would recommend go look it up online and read it for free, because you have no clue what you're, subscribing to. You don't know what it is that your belief is based on. He never read it. He was just taught it's a good thing and told some good things, basic things about it.
All right. Well, it is 10:30. I've had this Netflix thing pulled up in the background the entire time, but other conversations took over. But it was a good conversation. Okay. So I
minute review.
What?
On the Netflix stuff?
Oh yeah. So I'll talk about a couple of things so I had time this weekend to to catch up on a couple of things that looked interesting to me. And as I'm looking through this, season 2 is out, so that's my plan for next weekend.
Probably. I haven't started that. I've heard some good things about it, but it's still on my watch.
Out of the ones that I'm recommending, I highly recommend season 1. It is very Dexter-ish, Dexter-esque, but I think this is a little more I'm liking this series more because, for Dexter, he was a serial killer, but he was the hero that you feel like, okay, this guy he's killing people, but he's a good guy, and you felt kind of
an anti-hero, but
yeah,
doing good service possibly.
You're like, I know he's the bad guy, but he doesn't feel like a bad guy. Reading the Dexter books, he doesn't feel like so clear-cut of a good guy. The series, he comes across as more of a good guy than not a good guy. And then at the end, it just leaves you feeling like, why? Granted, he can't have a happy ending because he's a serial killer, so it kind of makes sense, but you felt like he was a good... So this one does a little better at being like, there's a sympathy. I guess maybe that's... hopefully that didn't give away too much. So the main guy has a Dexter-ish type thing, but there are you're interested in what he's doing, but you don't feel as sympathetic towards him. At least that's what I got out of it. So, but I thought it was a more polished version of Dexter from me.
Okay, yeah. Then I'll have to check it out. Yeah,
I mean, and the story, there's so many times where you're like, it did a really good job of foreshadowing, but not giving away too much, and also keeping you keeping the story changing. Like you were, did not expect that. Whereas Dexter was a little more kind of cookie cutter for me. I still really enjoyed Dexter. I think it's a great show, had a lot of great lines, a lot of great episodes, but it got a little formulaic, right? Hey, here's the main villain for this series, and here's the main villain for this season.
This guy's a good guy, and you're a good guy who's disguised as a gooder guy who's still a bad guy or whatever, but you're making it to not get found out while eliminating the bad guy in a way no one traces back. Yeah. That's pretty much.
Yeah, it got a little formulaic, and so for granted, You has only been one season so far. I'm curious to see how season 2 goes. Hopefully they can keep it going the same. But I highly recommend season 1 of You. It's a great watch. Very, 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 very well written. That's So out of my suggestions here, so this is all stuff on Netflix. There's one other thing that's I think might also be on Netflix, but I've been watching it on Funimation. But highly recommend You season 1. Second recommendation is The Witcher. Have you seen it?
Yep, binge watched that last weekend.
Yeah, I was expecting it to be kind of, I'm Game of Thrones too. It didn't feel that as it had, it was Game of Thrones like.
I've heard of the games, but I've never read any of the books. No clue what the story is. Never played a single game. Not a clue. I just heard it and saw it was on there. I didn't even know they were making it. So
yeah. Well, I've been keeping up on it. I was waiting for it to come out.
Super confusing at the beginning. I was completely lost. Like, what am I watching?
Yeah.
Not a clue. I don't know any of these people. There's like some war going on at the very beginning. Like, I don't even know who's the good guys. What am I watching? And then by the end, I was like, now it all makes sense. And I'm waiting for season 2 all of a sudden. And what happened?
Yeah, I almost want to rewatch it because of that fact. I think that is one of the things that saved the show.
Something like the timelines were just they were here in the future, and then they jumped to the past.
Well,
they jumped the thing off to the side, but it all culminates near the end. You're like, okay, now I'm getting a bigger picture.
Yeah, because there was one season I was like, wait a minute, that guy's dead. Why is he? Is he a traitor? Is that? Oh, this is. There are different timelines. Everything is starting to make sense there.
Yeah, I ran the same thing. I was like, I thought that dude was dead. What am I watching? Is that that guy, or is it that guy? And then
I was thinking, is he a traitor, or is that somebody pretending to be that guy? And then, dude. So that is one of the things that I thought was they did so well with The Witcher, and that was the main thing that kept this feeling like a Game of Thrones clone. And granted, it's kind of set in a similar style world. The other thing that I really like is they did not hold your hand. Like so many other shows, they over-explain what they're doing. Like,
they didn't explain anything. I think the first 3 episodes I was lost. Like I just keep watching because occasionally something cool happens.
Yeah.
You don't pick up on names and events till much later, and then as the faces keep popping up, you're like, okay, now I see you. Yeah. Now I'm getting it.
Yeah.
And it makes you think back to the earlier episodes. So yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't played the games or read the books. But I have been listening to other people talk. Like the Quartering was talking about this, and he was raising up news articles, and it sounded like it was going to be infused with SJW nonsense. And there's a little bit of, diversity for diversity, and there's a couple of scenes and a bit of dialogue where it's kind of like, that was forced. That was a bit... But those are very, very...
Overall, I didn't really get those
there was a couple of those in there, but I didn't think that took away from the whole story, and I was like, those weren't the focus of the story, which is... If you listen to people talking about it, like the director of this was talking about, like, she was criticizing fans of The Witcher, because a lot of the people watching the show were fans of the video games, and she was criticizing them, like, oh, these people are toxic trolls, and, toxic masculinity, and all that sort. I was like, oh, this show is going to be so bad, because based on her responses, She was basically saying, you guys are the fans, you don't get to determine what's going on. We're the directors, we are the ones making the show, we'll show you. And I was like, if you're going like that against your core audience, that means you've got an agenda that's not making sure you hold true to the books or you hold true to the fandom. But surprisingly, this holds up. I haven't read the books or anything, but I'm familiar with kind of the general story and the general theme of the world. And this seems to be fairly in line with the actual books and similar to the video game. So it's not a complete departure where they just slap The Witcher on there and then, you know, basically SJW for 45 minutes and then maybe 15 minutes of sword fight sort of thing. That's what a lot of people were fearing about this because of what the director of the show and what other people, like certain cast members, were talking about. It's like, oh, this is a
attention.
Yeah.
I just thought it was on there last weekend.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I've heard of it. I guess we'll start watching.
So there's a couple other cast members who were talking about, you know, strong female characters, and there's not enough diversity, and you know, even criticizing the show itself for not being, you know, empowering enough to women.
Really?
Yeah, it's bizarre.
I thought they had plenty of female characters. They had a queen in there that. I don't. Never mind. I don't want to give stuff away, but
yeah, the lioness. Yeah.
Characters in there that are strong.
Yeah, Yennefer, a strong female character, and that was the one that was most surprising for me because when I first introduced to that character, I was like, okay, here we go. This is gonna be the permanent victim. Nothing's her fault. Everything is victim of circumstances. No,
You went to the point where you feel a little sorry, but then you really hate her. But then after, you're like, you know what? It's not so bad. I think she just needed to come to terms with who she is, and it was like you could see her building up.
Yeah,
it made for an entertaining character.
Yes, that is a character done well. And again, that goes back to the source material. They stuck true to the source material on that. They could have omitted things or taken things out that would have taken away from that. And that's so
I mean, as far as the victim goes, yeah, that was kind of in her head, but everybody else around her was like, cut that out.
Yeah. So
acting like that, you'll go nowhere, you're gonna die.
Yeah, so I don't know if there is I did mention slight spoilers in the description, so spoiler alert, I'm going to mention something that is kind of pivotal to the story, but this is what sold the show as being above average for me. Jennifer's makes a sacrifice early on to change herself from being what she considers deformed and hideous into being being beautiful. And the cost of that was the inability to have children on her own. And during the course of the show, that's what she laments more. She's like, screw being beautiful and all that sort of thing. I would give all that up to have a baby, and I can't have one. And it's something I can't reverse. And that's kind of her motivation from that point on. I was like, I was not expecting that at all. And that is a completely redeeming quality for that character. And that was completely unexpected for me because, like I said, I've been reading articles about this, and I was like, oh, it's gonna be interesting to watch, but it's gonna be so cringe on. And there was a couple areas of the CG that are kind of eh. There was a couple of bits of dialogue that I was just like, oh, that was forced in there, but acceptable. But that transformation in her character right there was like, oh, she's not just like this powerful woman who can do no wrong sort of thing. That's what I was expecting. And that change of I've lost something, I didn't realize how valuable this something is, and now it's all I can think about.
That's the part where I said I kind of hated the character.
Yeah.
Got to that point, I was like, I don't think I like this person. That not somebody I find appealing, just extremely selfish. Basically, it looks like they stole what they had rather than trying to earn it, trying to overcome their victim complex, whatever. But then later in the movie, that is a downside that they wish didn't happen. Yeah. They have learned that they made a mistake and are now trying to compensate. And then after you're like, okay, now I get this character. That's actually a decent character. And then they do some redeeming stuff, but it looks like there's more to go for future.
Yeah, so that is a slight knock against the show, in that it tells a somewhat complete story, but you can tell this is just Act 1. This is building up. It's like this is like usually all the characters coming together and all that sort of stuff happens in like the first episode or two of a season, and then they proceed from there. This took like an entire season, and they're still not all together. They're still kind of jumbled around, and you're like, but now we've finally got to the point where all the main characters have interacted with each other, and you're like, that's usually the point a show reaches when it's on like a first or second episode or first couple of episodes.
Correct. The ending of the last 8th episode was like, this feels like the way the first episode should have ended to build on to the rest, but there was so much packed in those 8 episodes. It might as well just been an 8-hour long.
Yeah. So I think.
I don't know.
Yeah. So
there are some other bits and pieces I thought were pretty awesome.
Yeah. That's a
side stories that happen with elves and with whatever that night lady thing is in the castle. That was pretty cool. I don't know what they called it. It was like somebody that got cursed and deformed. And
that was cool. Yeah. So the other, like, so I've seen people playing the game and all that sort of thing. I don't remember a bard character in there. That might have been something added to the show, but that added so much to the show I did not expect. So that was one of the... Yeah.
I think he was one of the catalysts that changed the main guy.
Yeah. Like, he's a central catalyst to a lot of the story, but also he adds a kind of jovial, like, unexpected comic relief, but, like, silly, but not to the point of making the show... Like, I don't know how they walked that fine line and made that work, because that was
Well, because with the mixed up timelines, I did not realize it, but he kind of causes everything.
Yes.
He's at the start of all of that unintentionally, and sometimes gets a little bit of mischief. So yeah, a bit of that sidekick, extra comedy type guy, but not to the point of it ruins the show or it gets, it fits in with the world. So even though it's dark and gritty and whatever, he would be like a minstrel guy back then. Just fit in.
Yeah, it fits in. It sounds like, if I was reading that on paper, I'd be like, dude, this guy is so absurd. It does not fit in this world, because I thought The Witcher was kind of dark and gritty. And again, going back to Game of Thrones, there's not so much a comic relief character. The closest that comes to it is Tyrion Lannister, but he's not so much comic goofy. He's comic cynic.
Maybe the drunk parts. But...
Yeah, so there's a little bit of levity in there, but mostly it's him being satirical and mocking people without them realizing they're being mocked, and just that's the only sort of real kind of comic or kind of levity in that show. But this show does a good job of kind of bouncing all over the place, and it does it really, really well, which I think also sets it apart from Game of Thrones, because this is going to be compared with Game of Thrones, across the board. It's kind of unavoidable at this point, because Game of Thrones is such a powerhouse for HBO.
This seems more like a fantasy. I mean, Game of Thrones was fantasy, yes.
Yeah.
And they have the White Walkers and the dragons, but it seemed more medieval political.
Mm-hmm.
Just a lot of backstabbing and a lot of creating alliances and then failing to follow through, or it turns out you had an alliance with somebody else and it was all a lie. A lot of that court manipulationship.
Yeah.
Manipulating, but this is more intertwined stories in a fantasy medieval realm, so there is some of that.
Yeah.
It's not so much deception and backstabbing, it's just I guess people finding where they belong in this place.
Yeah. So this does a better mix. Like that's why, like, so Game of Thrones, again, like you said, it was very politically heavy-handed, and that was kind of the draw of that show, and it's got a darker tone and all that. This does a very good job of switching tones and going back and forth, and it's a much better. I'm trying to, like, the only way I could kind of describe it's kind of like a musical composition, which I guess we'll go into the next really good talking point. But the music in this is fantastic. Like the bard's songs, like even like the actor who's actually singing in the show.
Oh yeah,
like the
enjoy
music.
them. They fit.
Yeah, they fit the song. They're actually written really well. They've also got it playing sometimes during the credits, and I was like, this music is really good. And it could have been a point of failure for the show, and like, these are really catchy, and I don't know how they did that. Because usually when music is in a show and it's created for a show, it's kind of meh. But the music in there, the bard, like as a bard character, could run his own spin-off, and that would be enjoyable and watchable. Like that's, even if it would probably more. Less fighting monsters and more kind of him getting into sitcom type situations, and barely escaping and all that sort of thing. But the power of that music and the song, like the fact that all that music was written specifically for this show, and I think it still stands on its own. I was like, I was not expecting that. that was a really good positive for me. Again, it's one of those shows I'm like, I kind of want to rewatch it. Just even though I just watched it last weekend, I'm kind of like, maybe I should set aside some time this weekend and watch it again.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna have to. Like I said, I had no expectations. Never read any of the books. Never played a game. I'd only seen screenshots from some of the Witcher games. So that's all I knew is, well, there's 3 Witcher games. Must be popular.
Yeah.
So I saw it, watched it. After about the 3rd episode, I'm still scratching my head like, what am I watching? I just don't, I don't have a clue. There are some parts that are keeping me engaged. It seems interesting. But by the end, completely different view on everything. You could see like this weird interwoven pieces that just slowly sliding together to make a bigger picture.
Yeah,
so,
and it makes me wonder if the books were written in that same kind of way. I don't know. I've not read the books myself, but now I'm kind of like, I should read the books. It's kind of similar to with Game of Thrones. I watched the first full season, binge watched it, and then started reading the books, and then passed the show, and then
I think kind of, but not as drastic as the show.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't off with just the Witcher character. And then some of the other characters like Yennefer and the girl, what's her name, Suri or something like that. Ciri.
Ciriella? I don't remember her name. Yeah.
Something like that. But I think those were kind of like arcs added after. But since part of their character growth happened before the original introduction of the Witcher, they would have to jump back to before the first book was written.
Yeah.
Just introduce how they came about, which is kind of what the show did anyway. So I think it probably does stem from the books,
but probably not in the same manner. Because that was I thought was
it was kind of sharp. You just hop from one episode to another, and up until about episode 5 or 6, you don't realize it's skipping time.
Yeah.
I had no clue till, again, you mentioned a character. I was like, I thought they were dead. Is this not? This is a different time. That means what I just watched was probably also a different time. What am I watching? And so then I had to start paying attention to like when events they were talking about, and was it something that already happened? And you do find that out that, yeah, you've already seen what they're talking about. You just jump to something previous. So it kept it interesting.
Yeah.
But there's still some stuff that I probably need some clarification on. I think it's a rewatch for sure.
So another show I'm going to compare this to, although I don't think you've seen it. There is a show on the WB or the CW or whatever it was at the time called Legend of the Seeker, and it's based on a book or a series of books called The Sword of Truth. Now, that was a little more closer to, the Legend of Hercules or, Xena Warrior Princess, although it was kind of in the same style, but it was a little way more, upbeat and sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
but yeah,
regular TV.
Yeah, a lot more, goofy comedy and stuff thrown in. And it was directed by Sam Raimi, so he's
he's
got
weird
that goofy.
guy.
Yeah.
I mean, does horror very well, but just interjects weird comedy in the horrors.
Yeah. And I didn't realize this. Yeah. I didn't realize this till years later, but yeah, he was involved with the Legend of Hercules and the Xena Warrior Princess. It's like, oh, okay.
A lot of sense.
Yeah. That explains why she was in a cameo in, I think it was Spider-Man 2. Anyway. Why was I bringing that up?
The similarity to the Seeker show.
Okay. So, in the Legend of the Seeker show, there are aspects that are, the person is doing something, and then they're explaining what they're doing, and it frustrated me while watching that show. There's this huge exposition, like it's, one character's explaining how the world works to another character. It's because it's for you as the audience, so you understand what's going on, but they hold your hand through the whole thing, and you're like, oh, that was weird and cool, what was that? And then they explain it right away, and you're just like, okay, I was expecting that to be something, oh, we don't know what's going on, this is something you have to figure out. It's like, no, we just explained this thing, and this is something that we knew about, we just didn't tell you earlier, and it just felt like, so either they were over-explaining, or they were explaining it as it happened, and that felt like unfulfilling while watching the show. I thought it was a generally good show, it was enjoyable, had a lot of fantasy stuff, and it was pretty good for the time that it came out, and I would recommend watching that if you get a chance to just sit down with an episode or so. It's enjoyable, but there are a lot of times where it's like, yeah, this is intended for a younger audience, and you're holding their hand through the, like, oh, you didn't catch that, what was going on? Here, let me tell you what was going on, and then I'll tell you what was going on again. It seemed a little too much of that. Whereas in The Witcher, there are things going on, and they don't explain it. And at first, that was an annoyance, but as the show went on, I was like, they're not having a character dictate and explain something. They're just doing it. Like, so there are certain things, like with Yennefer, they actually had to explain what was going on. But one of the big cases for me is he keeps drinking these different potions, and nobody talks about them. Nobody explains it. I'm like, maybe eventually they'll explain that in the show. And it's like, oh, they don't need to explain it. He's showing what they do.
He's a Witcher. He uses these potions to boost whatever he's doing. It just...
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
At first I was kind of like, I would like to know what's going on. Somebody will explain it eventually. And then I was like, nobody needs to explain it.
Yeah.
It's a demonstration.
Right.
He's not talking about... And
There's
after... Yeah.
Like, his eyes will change color after drinking one. So, they are showing what a Witcher can do, but instead of being as if, I guess, from the perspective of the Witcher, you're more in the perspective of an outlier looking at a mysterious guy, which is how the rest of the world views the Witcher. They don't understand what a Witcher really is. So you're just as much in the dark as everybody else. You just a little closer to the action. So you got to kind of piece together, now I see what Witchers are.
Yeah. So I think that to me, it was like, okay, that's a sign that this show is kind of, it's asking more from its audience, and it is a little smarter than I originally anticipated it would be. And the last like good, so I don't really have too much criticism. There's a couple things I wanted to criticize, like like I said, the CG in some areas is pretty some of the makeup on the character or the creatures and stuff was just kind of and the one thing that irked me, and maybe that's just based on the source material. With some of the stuff about magic is kind of inconsistent given the rules that they've laid out, but it looks cool and it's interesting. So that's kind of a minor gripe. But the biggest point about this is this show probably would not be half as good without Henry Cavill as The Witcher. I don't know if you saw the original teaser trailer where it's just him in full makeup, with his eyes go black and he's walking towards the camera, and that was it. And I was like, no, this looks wrong. It doesn't. I thought it was gonna be bad, but no, he was a perfect casting for the role, and from what
amazing sword fights. So on the action parts, nailed it. Choreography was awesome. But he's like this dark stoic guy, but every once in a while you get a hint of just a decent guy that has feelings and isn't sure what to do about it.
Yeah.
It's like this weird balance that, it's like a guy that he plays the entire time this stoic, not even a hero, just kind of your dark anti-hero guy, but you can tell he's kind of covering up other aspects of himself.
Yeah.
So you can see it in certain scenes, certain just looks or the way he talks. So I think he nailed the way that character is supposed to be.
So this was one of those things is I thought I would see Henry Cavill as The Witcher, but he surprised me because for a while, while watching the show, I completely forgot.
I'd rather watch The Witcher than Superman.
Yeah, I forgot this is not, I stopped seeing him as Superman with a wig on, and was like, this is The Witcher. They did a really good job of, because, so it doesn't seem like Henry Cavill playing a character. It seems like that's the character. That is, and the other thing is, I don't know what he was eating or doing in his workout, but his biceps are like the size of Texas. I was like, how is that physically possible? He didn't look that ripped in Superman.
Well, two things I noticed. I went to go look that up because I was like, man, that guy is huge. Was he always that big? And they were showing pictures like back there in the Immortals, and he was toned, like really well toned, 6-pack, and like a third of the size he is in The Witcher. Not even close.
Yeah.
And then when you look at him as Superman, that's like stage 2, where again the 6-pack, shoulders are a little broader, pecs are a little bigger, and then when he's The Witcher, it's like that guy is like Thor sized, or what happened there? What's he been eating? I mean, he's like,
but that it makes when I was originally seeing stuff and I didn't see the actual end product in motion, it did not look natural. It looked bizarre. But then watching the actual show, I was like, dude, that is what a guy like that would look like.
Walking around fighting monsters, swinging a big sword and stuff. Yeah.
If you don't look like that, you die.
Yep. But I also read in another interview, I was just trying to verify about the timeline thing and was I missing some stuff. But he's a huge fan, has read a bunch of the books, has played all the games, and he asked to fill that part.
Yeah.
He was bugging the casting crew daily and his manager daily to say, hey, hear anything back? Anything back?
Yeah.
So he really felt he could nail the character. I think that's...
And he did it
probably
justice.
Why it worked so well is he knew the source material. He knew how this guy acts. What he's got in his head. He's already had a visual and said, yep, this is the way The Witcher is.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that I was afraid was going to get lost, with some of the controversies before the show coming out. But so here's the other thing is Henry Cavill, when he's talking about this show and he's gone on interviews, like he said he was actively pursuing the role. But the other thing is he said when somebody asked about toxic fandom, he went and defended the fan. He's like, yeah, they're not toxic, they're just passionate. And it's like, dude, this guy gets it, he understands it. That's why he fits so perfectly in this. He looks like the character. Granted, like if you compare the in-game version versus him, they don't look alike. But when you see it actually in the setting of the show, you're like, dude, he fits in perfectly. He is that role. That's
it kind of looks like maybe 20 years younger than the guy in the game.
Yeah,
the guy in the game looks a little older.
Yeah,
maybe
maybe
it's supposed to be like that. I think I read somewhere that this is like a prequel.
Yeah, this is a prequel, so
it's a different story.
Yeah, so in the games, whatever the Suri something or whatever, she's older. She's like in her teens or possibly 20s in the game.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I was about to demo him, bro. Did you see that play?
So that's why I was like, I know I've seen people playing the game, and I knew I was like Yennefer, although that, like, when they first introduced her, I was like, that's not Yennefer. What's going on here? But I didn't know the backstory. But the other girl, I didn't recognize that as her till like the last episode. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But she's like, she's like 9. What's going on here? Yeah. Yeah, I didn't piece that together till later. All right, so that's probably too much on The Witcher, and it's already it's 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Last recommendation: if you have not seen Six Underground,
you get to stop all the bullshit.
Oh,
I
watched that last weekend as well.
Yeah.
Surprisingly entertaining. I didn't know that was a Michael Bay movie.
Yeah, that was like, there's nothing like super like, oh, how did they come up with that? It's not like Inception or The Matrix or anything like that, but really enjoyable. It's a good time throughout the film. Yeah.
It harkens back to like early 90s action films while having better cinematography. I mean, the plot's basically an early 90s action film. But you do feel kind of rewarded at the end. I was kind of, hey, I liked the mission they were after, so I think it had some weight to it. The action scenes were pretty awesome. The parkour stuff, awesome.
Yep.
So just
and it almost brushed into the area of being like politically, I guess, for me, because I mean, so the like you said, the mission that they're after is stopping a guy who committed chemical attacks against his own people.
War crimes,
and I was like, well, in real life, that seems kind of like the Syria situation.
Yeah.
So, but if you look in the movie, that's why I was like, granted, it's not a real country that they're dealing with, but in real life, it's not so clear cut that that's the was it Prime Minister of Syria, or is he the president? I can't remember. It's not so clear if the leader of that country actually attacked his own people, and it almost looks like that's kind of not even possible. So whether it was an actual chemical attack or whether it was terrorists trying to blame it on the leader of that country is unclear. And I was like, the way Six Underground was kind of, I was like, oh, they're skating that fine line, but okay, never mind. They separated them, like they brushed along the side of that issue. It's like, yeah, that could be.
Close enough to get to modern scenarios and things happening nowadays without pinning specifically to anything or blaming anybody other than this dictator.
Yeah. So it started off, I was like, ooh, I don't know if, like, the rest of the show, or the rest of the film is really good, but it's cutting that razor's edge. I don't know if it crosses that line, I'm going to have to, like, But thankfully, it escaped back and was like, yeah, this is fun fantasy. It would be awesome if we could just not... We know that there are bad, evil dictators. It would be awesome if we could just take them out.
Yeah, if you don't look into it as any sort of political movie, and you're not looking for a amazing deep plot that's just mind bending and twist ending, all that, just a good action movie, I think it fits that genre perfectly. I think if Michael Bay could stick with stuff like that instead of borrowing like childhood movies, cut it out with the Transformers and the Ninja Turtles or whatever, just kind of stick to action movies like that. I think that's his.
Yeah, that fits what he's.
He's very good at that.
Stop saying what to say.
The other
And-
show I don't have pulled up here, but I think I've talked with you about before. iZombie. That's a show I've been watching on and off for a while, and I'm surprised that they had a final season. I was not expecting that. Like, it got to what?
Third season or fourth season?
I think
What's the
it
final?
might be fifth.
Fifth?
Did they make it to 5 seasons? I don't
I'm
see
not
it on
sure. I
here.
think I got somewhere into season 2, but I'm
Yeah.
kind of on and off with that show. I can binge watch a couple episodes, and then I'll go watch something else. And it's not that it's bad; it's that it is kind of like a CW-ish
Yeah.
type show, a little bit gory in some areas, but it's kind of one of those episodic ones where there's an overlying plot, but they only poke at it every once in a while here and there till towards like the last 2 or 3 episodes of that season. So it's just,
well, at least it's not like Psych where they just, hey, we didn't build up towards anything the entire season, but here's a bad guy for the last 2 episodes that's gonna be a cliffhanger.
I mean, there's something that's always looming out there that they need to.
So they do a steady progression along an arc, but the show keeps things interesting, and I think they actually handled the final season. Like, at first I was like, man, this seems a little different from previous seasons, and then once I got towards the end, I'm like, oh, they're not having anymore. That explains a lot. That explains why, because the last season, things kind of, that arc kind of goes like turbo mode. And I was like, because I mean, like season 1 and season 2, there's like overall arc, and it seems to kind of build slowly. But the last season of iZombie, there doesn't seem, they still solve cases and stuff like that, but it's less filler, and it just seems to be running full speed. That last season I thought was phenomenal. It was
like when shows end properly.
Yeah.
I don't like them just canceled and dangling out there.
Yeah.
Heroes.
I was not expecting the last season. I didn't think that was the last season. I've expected them to continue, and I was like, because they could have kept it going probably like 2 more seasons. It might have lost a little bit of quality into time, but the fact that they're like, yeah, this is their final season, we're just throwing everything at the wall, and we're gonna resolve all these, all the cliffhangers. We're gonna resolve everything. We're gonna wrap it up in this night. I was like, oh, well done. That was I was surprised.
That's the way to go. Don't let your show die out.
Yeah. So here's an example of that happening. Like Supernatural, man. Yeah.
Is that still going on?
Yeah, they're on like season 13 or something crazy like that.
Yeah, I think I maybe got into season 3 or 4, and I was like, okay, I like the guys, but I've had enough. They started getting real weird.
It should have ended at season 6 like they originally planned, or maybe that was season 7, but they had a phenomenal ending built in and filmed and released, and then they decided to keep it going, and it's still decently good. It just keeps dropping every season, and these more recent seasons has been infused with SJW nonsense.
Is that CW?
Yeah, so the iZombie and Supernatural on CW, yeah. Well, one of the
woman shows like that, Superwoman's like that. I've been seeing that pop up in a couple other CW shows that they seem very heavy-handed with that stuff.
Yeah, iZombie, thankfully, there's a bit of that here and there, but thankfully it's minimized and it doesn't detract from the show. Supernatural, the past 2 seasons, it has detracted from the show. Because these guys, they fought like literal demons, and they fought like vampire, like the alpha vampires, and they fought like beings from other dimensions and angels, and then in the most recent seasons, they got their asses handed to them by low-level nothing witches and some vampires or whatever, and then they get saved by women, and I'm just like, no. Why? It's because there's a group of women that built up in the show, and now it's kind of like Girl Squad, and they have an episode or two centered around them. And these guys who have fought the devil himself need to be bailed out by Girl Squad. And I'm like, why? And it's not because they're facing like this baddie that they've never fought before. It's like, no, these are common. You just got beat up by Thug A. This is not a named character. This is not a big. It's just
maybe
I'm
that's
here for a show. Oh, it's so bad.
I think the thing they're not understanding is you can't just shoehorn that in. If you didn't start your show with that, as in, you know, you got these two brothers, and then there's also some awesome female supernatural fighter, you know, maybe a sister or somebody.
Well, they've had a couple like that throughout the show.
Sometimes it's in the goofy, they do something dumb, right? Kind of like the comedy slapstick thing, and she has to come and save them. If they kind of establish that at the beginning, then fine. Then you can build her up as the one that has to keep rescuing one or both of them, right? Maybe they're mostly capable, but sometimes do dumb stuff. If you build the show up that way, then that character fits. But when you've got season after season of them constantly overcoming all these like crazy supernatural beings and pretty much literally fighting the devil.
Yeah.
You can't just toss other people in there who
so
maybe you see them in a few episodes and sure they got a few fighting chops, but these guys have fought everything under the sun. Why do they need you?
Yeah. So the thing about Girl Squad is one of them is like, two of them were teenagers, and it's like, okay, these guys are in their 30s. They do this for you are kind of like a part-time hunter, and you just you needed me to save your butts. Like
pretty substantial. Yeah.
It's and in those episodes where this sort of stuff gets thrown in, like they get tricked by stupid stuff that they've shown previously that that doesn't work on us, and it's like
it's just lazy writing. Like now they're wanting to turn them more into bumbling.
You're like 3 seasons ago, that definitely would not have caught you by surprise, but for some reason, because it needed for these girls to show their stuff, that thing that you wouldn't have been tricked by otherwise, you fell for it. It gets bad. All right, last thing is One Piece. I've been haven't necessarily been watching the show. It's been playing in the background as I'm working on other stuff. Because it's forever. There are like 900 something episodes. I can't be bothered to watch every
60s. I haven't gotten very far.
Yeah, well, each episode's only like 15 minutes, so it's not, and you can skip through intros and stuff like that. But
it's on Netflix now?
It is not on Netflix. I've been watching it on Funimation. It might be on Hulu or Netflix. I don't remember, but I've been watching on Funimation. Although Funimation is so bad, their website is annoying.
Well, I tried a free trial and I wasn't that happy. I got another website with a ton of anime that you watch for free.
Yeah.
You have to click on the ads in between each video.
Yeah, I don't want the ads, so I've got the subscription to Funimation. But it takes like so long for a video to load up. Like half of the time it's supposed to go to the next video and then it will just stop and you've got to log out and log back in or clear the cache to get it to start up again. Yeah, Funimation is a terribly designed website. I don't know why this is their website and they haven't bothered to pay anybody to fix this because this is easy stuff to fix. Anyway, but I've been really enjoying One Piece. And I'm not going to talk too much about it because it is 11 o'clock. We've been talking for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
But I am surprised at how popular this show is because it's got a very anti-government. I was like, wow, I'm really enjoying this show because of that. There are some good guys that are part of the Marines, but most of the time it's the Marines that are the bad guys and not the good guys and keep pretending they're the bad guys. It's like, I was like, man, I think they're doing a really good job, and there's a lot of I was like, man, there are a lot of libertarian ideas being expressed here, although maybe not intentional. I'm not sure. It's pointing out like hey, you can't have all that power because some bad guy is going to take hold. Oh, wait a minute. All that power, we're consolidating it in the Marines because, that's not going to attract bad guys to take over it. Oh, that's exactly what happened. Yep. That's why you don't do that. So, it's a bit cheesy sometimes, but it's got an interesting cast of characters. The voice acting is really good, and it's a goofy... But I've been really enjoying that.
Yeah, I tried watching some of the Naruto stuff.
Oh,
I think One Piece is a little bit more entertaining. Naruto's
One Piece is... Yeah.
I don't know what... Some funny stuff, but it just drags.
Yeah, Naruto is boring. Like, the first season is meh. The rest of it is just... I fell asleep so many times watching that show. I don't even remember what happens, like, at the end.
Yeah, I gotta go back multiple episodes. I'm like, I don't remember any of this. I fell asleep through almost all these episodes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess kids entertained by whatever, but I don't. But yeah, One Piece so far is pretty entertaining.
Yeah. So I am enjoying the show so far. I think it's a really well written, although surprisingly well written given the goofball, and I'm surprised at all of the anti-authoritarian undertones that are laced in. I'm like, nah.
All right, yeah, I guess I'll pick that show back up, see what's out a little further.
Yeah, and it keeps everything like randomized. I'm surprised at how random the show has continually been. I expected some things to kind of be, them to run out of creativity, but it seems like they keep coming up with new and creative things that you're like, oh, wow, that was weird. Did not expect that. All right, so I think that was all. Like, man, that's all I planned to talk about, and we spent like 2 hours talking about everything before that. All right, definitely not gonna have time. Communist Manifesto. Oh, there was one other thing. Have you seen? Was it Rising of the Shield Hero? I don't know if I recommended that to you. I'm not gonna talk about that if you haven't seen it. That's actually, maybe I'll just end the stream and then say, hey, like, have you seen this? Have you seen that? Do one of those. But Rising of the Shield Hero is really good as well. And what's another one I was watching?
Is that on Netflix?
I think that was on. I found that on Hulu, I think. So there's a show called Gate, which is on Hulu. That was really good. Rising of the Shield Hero is not on Netflix, but you might be able to find it on your other the other place that you get stuff. Man, there was one more.
Okay.
There's one more that I recently found that I was really, really liked, and I was like, oh, it's over. What was that other one? I don't remember. All right. Anyway, those were just some of my recommendations of stuff.
I hate it.
But I guess that other Gate was like a month or something ago, and the other one I think was also about a month ago. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream. Thanks for putting up with me, everybody who did join up, and I will see you guys next Monday.
Yeah, if anybody's watching, Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year.